and welcome back to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I'm your host, George Blitch, and I'm here with my co-host today, Matthew Mitchell, and we have a very special guest. We are joined today by Doug Duren, who is a passionate hunter, farmer, conservationist, land and wild game manager, and if you ask me, a damn fine human being. Doug is the owner of Lone Oak Interests, which specializes in site and land management consulting and contracting services throughout the Wisconsin area. He's also known as a contributor on the MeatEater show and the MeatEater podcast, and is featured in the documentary Stars in the Sky. Doug also manages the Duren family farm in Richland County, Wisconsin, in the Driftless area. His most recent endeavor is the project by the name Sharing the Land, which focuses on connecting landowners and land access seekers with the purpose of enjoying and building healthier lands together and becoming active stewards together in the process. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's really nice to be here with you, George and Matthew. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'd like to start off with having you tell us a little bit about how you got the idea of starting the Sharing the Land initiative.
I'd like to be able to say that it was this brilliant original idea that I had, but it's really not. What did I don't remember who said it, but they said that good artists borrow and great artists steal. I don't know if I'm trying to be great, but I can steal from the great ones, and Aldo Leopold is certainly who I stole the idea from. Folks know a lot about Leopold and his conservation in the Southwest and in the Midwest, and contributions that he's made, the father of modern conservation stuff. We can talk about more if you want to. But one of the things that he did about the same time that he bought the land where his shack is and where he wrote almost all of a Sand County Almanac is he started hunting in the Verona and near a little town outside of Madison, Riley. And how he was able to get hunting permission there was to talk to landowners. And when he met one of the landowners, he mentioned something about wanting to hunt and, would there be an opportunity for that? And this guy, Reuben Paulson, said, hey, I'd be fine, but I'll tell you, there aren't many pheasants here anymore. We have too many trespassers. And old Aldo said, well, that may be true, but your habitat isn't that great either. So I guess it was, I don't know, it was an insult, but it was certainly the truth. And so what he offered is that his buddies and he would come out and do conservation work on that property, improve the habitat for the species that they were particularly after, which was ringneck pheasants. And but if you're improving pheasant habitat, you're improving habitat for all kinds of species, which is kind of a cool thing too. And that was really how this thing called the Riley Game Cooperative started. So it was the idea that people who were seeking access would work on the private land that they wanted to access, and that they would work with the landowner and improve that property, help them out around the property. And in exchange for that, they would get access to that land. And in the case of Leopold and Reuben Paulson, Leopold and his friends got exclusive access to it. The family and whatnot still hunted just as and so that's really where the idea came from. And I guess I'd say a couple of other things. When I was a kid, and I'm 63 now, but when I was 12 years old, I remember in our area how things began to change. I don't remember prior to that there being any absentee owners or folks from away, as we used to call them, who owned land around here. And then this fellow by the name of Hans Morsbach bought land outside of town out here. And I know I'm pointing over my shoulder, but outside of town out here, this is where it was. And he bought kind of a rundown old farm. And I don't know, there's 80 or 120 acres there. And we used to hunt the edges of it. A friend of mine lived right by it. Well, the first thing that Hans Morsbach did when he bought that, he was a guy from Milwaukee, is he put up no trespassing signs. And I was never seen one before. It was the first time we'd seen them. And we're like, what the hell is this all about? And he immediately started to work on improving that property from a conservation standpoint. So big positive, right? He started doing that sort of thing. But from our perspective, the negative was, he's not letting anybody on there. Prior to that, it was pretty much a tradition. You could just knock on somebody, on a door and they go, yeah, it'd be great. Go ahead. You can go in there hunting if you want to. Hey, I might need a little help fixing fence next week. Sure, we'll come back. And so it was that kind of, but everybody it was a community. It was neighbors. It was that sort of relationship. So it was just very natural. We were talking about things before we got started here about things being organic. And that was just sort of an example of that organic attitude. Also at that time, to clarify, Wisconsin trespass law was if your land wasn't posted, then it implied that it was okay to access it for whatever, for hunting or foraging or whatever. Now the law has changed that if you're on somebody's land without permission, you're trespassing. There's no need to post it. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, just from a practicality standpoint. Anyway, funny story. A couple of friends of mine and I rode our bicycles up to this spot where we used to access the trout stream through this farmer's field. And he had one of these old school, you've seen them, the wire fence, the wire gate where you lop the thing over, just tightens up. Everybody's used them. And we ride our bikes up, and this is a spot where a lot of people access that trout stream from. We ride our bikes up there and we're going to go down trout fishing. And here on that fence, the farmer had put a sign that said, if your land is posted, stay the hell off of mine. And we looked at each other like, well, what does that mean? And, ours isn't posted. And so we all went fishing. Well, as we started to think about it and talk about it, this guy, Hans Morsbach, had posted his land. He also accessed the trout stream from there. And he drove a brand new Mercedes-Benz car, which in our area was like a spaceship, right? I mean, in that period of time. And so it wasn't like he could, park somewhere and not anybody go, oh, I wonder who it's like some old beat up truck or something. But so old Charlie, the guy who had owned that land, had seen him accessing it and also knew that he'd put that posted signs up. And that was, I didn't know it at the time, but that became it was obviously ingrained in my memory, but that became one of these things where it's like, well, this is interesting that was sort of a moment in time where the change, at least in my lifetime, began. Now in our area, 65% of my county is owned by people who don't live here on a full-time basis. A lot of recreational property, a lot of second homes, and that sort of thing. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I mean, there's pros and cons to all of it. It's very much the way it is, right? So what are some of the things that we can do to, I don't know if integrating those folks into the area is a part of it, but certainly how does that change the dynamic of conservation and wildlife and hunting and all of that? Some of those landowners, I'd venture to guess the majority of them own that land for hunting and recreation. Others, it's an investment or a place just to get away and that sort of thing. And some of them, certainly during COVID, we saw more people moving out here. And of course, during that same period of time, agriculture changed dramatically. This area was quintessential Midwestern dairy farm, the cheese state. If you look at our license plate, there's a little red barn with a silo and cows on it and stuff. It's not the way it is anymore. It's sort of that was that idyllic view of I grew up in that idyllic view, the classic Wisconsin dairy farm, old barns like the one on our farm and 40 milk cows and all of that. And that just ain't so anymore. And a lot of people bemoan that. And there's parts of that I bemoan, but a lot of people bemoan that, but I'm a little more of a realist. It's like, okay, well, this is the way it is. How do we keep moving through life? Because we're not going to take it back to the 1950s or 1960s. It's not going to go back there. And how can we have a functioning economy and a functioning ecosystem and all of that in this area? And what are the components that are going to allow that to happen? So did I answer your question?
You kind of did. No, it's I think that's a great foundation of things there too. And I was always noticing that you have brought a lot of people in, kind of in a mentor capacity, maybe on your property, or kind of in that same exchange. I know that there's a lot of folks who've, wanted to access your property to hunt or forage, whatever it may be. And, you've talked about before that idea of, okay, the best way for you to learn this land is to also work on this land. And I feel like with that idea of the landowner, land access, and the initiative of sharing the land and bringing people together, that's a big part of it too. Is having people spend time on the property. I know as a landowner, I have a ton of things to manage, and every single time I get there, I can check one off the list and 3 more pop on, and it's just the way it is. Like some folks don't realize how much it accumulates. And, it's like you get a bad windstorm, Matt and I were talking about this on our last podcast. You got 4 trees down, now your chainsawing for half the day, and whatever it is that I know that you've had folks come out there and help you out with certain projects. I know there's a creek recently that you guys had kind of worked on there too, but I wanted to talk about how that kind of got started. When did you start bringing people on? Because I feel like that's kind of a blueprint in your property, the Duren Family Farm, for the idea behind sharing the land. Is that kind of a correct assessment?
Yeah, it is. Boy, how far back do you go into all this stuff? My dad was a great man, and a lot of that greatness I didn't realize until he was gone. Lessons from our fathers, lessons from our mothers for that matter too, but lessons from our fathers, some of them you don't learn until after they're gone. And looking back on how my dad sort of operated in life, he was very much a community person. And one of my first lessons in hunting was, you're not just hunting for yourself. He used to go up north because we didn't have many white-tailed deer around here, which people look at me like I got 2 heads when I tell them that, where we have so many now. But they used to go up north hunting. And it's big woods and tag alder swamps, and it's northern Wisconsin is a whole other world from down here in southwest Wisconsin. And the only way you would get a deer up there, and there were plenty, was to set up these deer drives and drive them. So you had to work cooperatively at it. And one of the first lessons was my dad saying to me, you're not just hunting for yourself, you're also out there for the other guy. And those guys really did a lot of that kind of work together. Folks that he let access the farm, who, again, when I was a kid, you didn't even have to ask, you could just go, because it wasn't, for a lot of different reasons, which is a whole podcast in itself, the change in what hunting became over the last 50 years. And again, it's not something I'm bemoaning, because hell, I'm a part of the hunting industry. Very much, where it was just something else. People always wonder, how come farmers don't bow hunt? And I was like, it's because bow hunting's for people who don't have enough to do. Farmers get too busy. I mean, it's very true. I can't imagine up here in October sitting in a tree waiting for a hapless deer to walk by. Are you kidding me? Hunting was something that we got to do when our work was done. Squirrel hunting. Which is going to open here in another week in Wisconsin. And it was like a tradition. There's not as much squirrel hunting as there used to be, small game hunting at all. People didn't own property to go hunting on it. Hunting was something that was, was just a byproduct of owning a piece of property. And then farmers are like, bow hunting? Really? You guys are going to sit in a tree all day? And in those days, gun hunting was pretty damn aggressive too. You got out there, people might sit for a little bit on opening day, and then they started deer drives. And you're out there because there weren't deer everywhere like there are now. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. There are deer, you see deer everywhere around here, which is a whole different this is a whole nother part of a discussion and issue. But what was I talking about?
Just the idea of how you coming together and working with other people on the land, and also hunting. I mean, it kind of ties in hand, that cooperative efforts there,
and that shape sharing the land.
Yeah, and my that idea of cooperativeness, and then kind of going back to that stuff when I was a kid, when we would you'd hunt someplace, and then they'd say, hey, we need some help unloading hay or whatever. I mean, just went and did it. It wasn't like, oh, I will do that for this. But to think that in the 1930s that Aldo Leopold did exactly that. And now fast forward to now, and the Leopold, the Riley Game Cooperative went on until really into the 50s, even after Leopold's death, but he was the glue, the force behind it, right? So that was actually going on while he was doing all that stuff out on his land with where the shack is and all of that, and all his work at the university and his work with other landowners and all this stuff. Aldo Leopold died when he was 61 years old. I'm 63. I can't get over how much that dude got done in his lifetime. And the other thing is if you ever just Google Aldo Leopold and look at images of him, dude's always sitting down smoking a cigarette. It's just like, how did this guy get anything done? But he got so much done, and he was not only do very practical aspect of it all, including the Riley Game Cooperative and something like that, but also being philosophical about it and about the relationship of people and the earth and people and the ecosystem and people and the land. And so all of that is, sort of balled into this whole thing. And a few years ago, I invited, we've always had family and friends come and hunt with us, right?
Sure.
And usually they'll offer to come and help with some work or whatever. Oh, I was going to tell you about landowners. One of the things about new landowners is that these folks that I'm telling you that are buying land around here, and I do land management consulting, and almost every one of them will say, man, owning a piece of land is a lot of work. And you guys know that, right?
Oh yeah.
And hunting is extraction, right? I mean, ultimately, when I hear that word or that phrase, hunting is conservation, I'm like, okay, maybe, or kind of. Hunting, first and foremost, is extraction. And that's what people are out there to do. They're out there to take something from the land. Well, what's the land getting out of that? Well, in the case of maybe reducing the deer population, we're doing good things for population control, and in our case, disease control, and that makes sense, right? So in some ways, hunting is conservation, and certainly we know that, like with Pittman Robertson money and licenses and all of that we as hunters are contributing to and wildlife management. And so that's financial contributions. But at the end of the day, the number one thing that hunting is extraction. You're taking something from the land. So my question always is, what's the land getting out of it?
Well, something I wanted to talk about a little bit, as you both are landowners, and I'm in the category of sharing the land, would be a land user. And, my friendship with George is one where we share a lot of similarities, a lot of interests. And so love to be an outdoorsman, love to get away from the city. My work involves sitting behind the desk, behind the computer. And one thing that I've been able to get out of the relationship in terms of like joining George out on his ranch and like doing work and immersing myself in that environment is a fulfillment that I would otherwise not have. Even going to a state park and hiking or doing anything that's been set aside, like on any piece of property that's set aside by the government or in, any federal land, et cetera. I mean, when you really get into it and immerse yourself into the land and become familiar with, a particular tree or particular ditch or a particular, area where the copperheads always are and whatnot. I mean, there's a lot of fulfillment when you're sweating and you're really like grinding it out in the 100-degree sun here in Texas, et cetera. I'm wondering, have you, through this program and listening to landowners or land users, et cetera, have you heard about people being fulfilled and ways that they otherwise would not have in their life? Like just kind of using my story as an example.
Yeah, let me give you an example. There's a young man, his name is Adam Esser, and he was one of the first folks that that was, I mean, just lucky enough. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, to be one of the first people that I chose to come and be a part of our, we called it Earn Your Hunt the first year that I did it. And he's a carpenter, builder, and his contribution was, I sent him the plans for the DNR CWD kiosks, these boxes that where you can submit a deer head for testing, and it's a great program, which is a whole nother discussion. And actually, one I'm going to have when we're done with the podcast with our deer biologist for our area. And I said, hey, is this something you can do? He goes, oh my gosh, I'd love to build one of those for you. And then I sent him the plans for it, and he redesigned it, which is still one of my favorite things about the kid. He's like, well, I can make it better. It needs to have a roof over it, and it's got to be a little bit wider. And, and he thought about it all. And it was super cool that he did that. And he built 2 of them. And we have one of them on my property. And if you see any of the stuff that we've done with like Cal last year on MeatEater, and then any of my posts about it, it's there, and it's orange, it's blaze orange. And he built that. In fact, it got tipped over in a storm this past winter. And then when I tipped it back up with the skid steer, I may have damaged it a little bit. So he came and fixed it all up again, So he built the second one that we took over to another place, and some other people are managing that. And I was like, dude, you're in, I mean, good work. And he spent a lot of time at it. And he's not been a real lucky hunter, which has always been one of the interesting things about him. And I think maybe some of it is because he's enjoying the rest of it so much. He came out, and on another day, I think I don't remember if we were prepping for hunting or I just wanted to show him around a little bit. And it was just him and me and my wife. And my wife doesn't give 2 hoots about hunting, right? But she really digs the land and the nature and the natural world. And so we go out and we went out for a walk, and we're talking, and I'm like, as you can imagine, blathering on about, trees and shrubs and animals and this perennial, and, just kind of pointing around and talking about stuff, and asking him about his experiences hunting and what that would have been like. And sometime later, he's still a part of it, 6 years later. I asked him, so what's your favorite part of this? I mean, I was trying to get some feedback, right? And he goes, well, the hunting's cool, and I really enjoy kiosks, and, we're really having a good time. But my favorite day out here yet is the one where we were just walking in the woods, and you were explaining about what was going on in the woods and the natural world. And I was learning about it, and you were kind of explaining how the deer travel and what to be looking for on, other parts of it. He goes, just being out there was my favorite part of it. And I'm like, this kid's either really good at schmoozing this old boy, or he really gets it, And I think it's a little bit of both. Adam, if you're listening, I'm telling the truth too.
But I think it's that idea of immersion. Like you just really have to get in it and spend time in it, it really brings a lot of life to your soul and just to the spirit of human nature. And one thing that's interesting is that I think our country is not doing technology and just the way the modern life is. I think young kids aren't really experiencing nature as much as they should. And I'm curious, has there been any thought about perhaps reaching out to schools or church groups and somehow getting them involved with like volunteer work on sharing the land with various landowners, et cetera?
Yeah, one of my friends is an educator, and more than one of my friends, but one in particular is he coordinates school to work programs for a number of school districts within what's called a CISA here. And we've talked about this quite a bit. He's actually wanted to, was interested in me having like a kid as an intern or something like that. And I'm real interested in that. But right now I'm actually considering more like college level kids that are in conservation and stuff. But yeah, it's so I'm not a kids these days kind of guy. Kids these days, they don't know. When I was a kid, I mean, I say it all the time, but I don't mean it in a disparaging way at all about kids these days. I mean, whatever period of time that you grew up in is the period of time that you grew up in, right?
Sure.
And how people get introduced to the natural world is really interesting. And I think there's actually more of it than maybe we give it credit for. If there's an interest, I mean, when I was a kid, nobody said, hey, you can be a ecologist, wildlife biologist, a forester, anything like that. And there's so much of that now, and there's so much opportunity in that now. Some of that might have to do with the circles that I travel in.
We're in big cities. I mean, we live in Houston, and so like we see this environment is very much like kids go outside, they're monitored by parents. I mean, there's not a lot of like bicycle riding down the bayous. I mean, it's a different world here compared to some of the rural environments out there. So you're right. I think perspective matters in that.
Well, but I think you make a good point, and it's important for that opportunity to be there. And I'm an advocate for being a part of school curriculum that, and I think, again, knowing some people in education that, especially in science and those areas, that they try to do that. But I really think that the opportunity, there's a great opportunity and an opportunity being missed. And I'm not, I mean, I don't want to get off on our education system or anything like that, but because there's a lot of reasons for the way, but I think it's something that we've lost. I don't know if we've talked about this before, if you're aware of this, but I actually taught high school for a number of years out in the mountains of New Hampshire. And I was surprised how many of the kids had never been up to the top of we was in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, that hadn't taken hikes. When I started talking about like Dome Rock and Gray Knob and King Ravine and that kind of stuff, they just looked at me like, huh, what are you talking about?
Like that mountain range right there.
You haven't been there? No. And others, on the other hand, just kind of look at you knowingly with that little nod, like they totally get it. So one of the things that I did when I was a high school teacher was to encourage that kind of, like, where is it that we live? When I was a kid, I didn't know that this was called the Driftless area. I just knew that this was this place where I lived, and there were a bunch of small farms, and we hunted, and it was a part of it. But hell, we made, I was in high school shop class, and we made recurve bows. When I was in high school, you could bring a gun to school,
in the back window of the truck, right?
For crying out loud, we could take them on the bus. I mean, because we were going to go squirrel hunting afterwards. Right. I absolutely agree with you that involving as many people as possible. We've had one of the kids that we have one kid who comes with his uncle, and Owen is his name. He's got this big old buck knife that he carries around on his hip, and the knife is like stabbing him in his leg. It's so long, but man, he likes carrying that thing around, and he's just so great to have along, to see that enthusiasm. But rather than it being like some of the learn to hunt, youth hunt stuff is, where you get that kid out there and get him in the blind, get him a chance to shoot a deer, and then that'll get him hooked. I'm like, not sure I'm a fan of that. But I also realized that I grew up in a different time. I started walking in the woods with my dad when I was 8 years old or 6 years old. And, hell, I was driving a tractor by the time I was that age too, I mean, if you could reach the pedals, you were literally driving it. If you could steer it well, there people picked up hay. But it was, I grew up in that. And going along with Dad when he went squirrel hunting was something that you got to do. And then by the time you're about 10, he'd hand you the gun and shoot that squirrel. He'd walk around the back of the tree. I realized that when I was a little kid, I was just essentially taking the place of a damn dog, right? I was just going around the back of the tree so the squirrel would come around the side of the tree where he could shoot it. And but those, not only are those wonderful memories of my father, but those were formative things as with my connection with the outdoors. So I think it's really important. I think that we're missing something if what we're encouraging is that kids are going to get out. Let's get them out there and get them hunting. No, let's just get them in the outdoors and get them in the natural world and help them begin to understand how it all fits together and experience how it fits together. Not necessarily, I mean, because, you experience that for yourself, but I think that's where we're going to grow conservationists, if you will, versus people just want to go out and take something from the land.
Well, and you bring up some really good points there, and our perspectives are similar too. I know your Duren farm has been in your family for 5 generations. And I'm a 5th generation landowner here in Texas, and we grew up with it. Like the same things you're talking about, growing up hunting, and working on the tractor, working on the land and kind of being out there. We have this, it's just second nature to us that I don't know any other way. I mean, I remember going to school in Boston, and I taught in the inner cities, and we talked about this in the East Coast, the connection we have there too. And remember going out and talking to people about like hunting and ranch life. And I had they thought that I was just crazy. Is like, you do what?
You might as well have been from Mars. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And the idea to them was so foreign of this, vast expanse of land that you could hunt off of. And just the type of things that I would do on a normal weekend with my friends that weren't abnormal to other folks who own ranches or, have worked on farms and things like that too. But we have this ingrained connection to the land because we were nurtured on it, and we from, just walking around, like you said, as a little kid through this property and stuff. So I don't take it for granted. And I definitely, my daughters are very much, I've brought them into that type of lifestyle. And, what they do with it is their decision there too, but it's just ingrained in me, and I want to ingrain it in them and have that appreciation, that true connection for what I feel is like real, instead of like I said, we're in Houston, we're in the concrete jungle. There's, it's like, oh, there's this little acre park in the neighborhood that you can go to. Well, it's not really a good representation of what the real expanse of nature. But I think that, programs like Sharing the Land and different types of initiatives out there that get people involved in going and exploring the outdoors, or maybe it's like, hey, you're going to go and do a volunteer, like our daughters are in Girl Scouts, go and clean up this park, let's pick up trash for a day at the state park or whatever it is. That while they're there, it's like you start to notice, all the different things about the wild world around you. And I can see this huge need. And, when we first talked about sharing the land and like how there are folks who want to get involved and they want access to this. And, it's like I was reading Mark Kenyon's book last night, talking about the public lands and how many, millions of acres are out there. A lot of people don't realize how much exposure that we can have if we step outside and look at where we can go. But a lot of people want to get involved in the areas around them and, work on the land and on the ranches, on the farms nearby. So they have like a true connection. It's different than going out to some state park that's 4 hours away, when these land access seekers, and I know that you've had like a nationwide initiative that you're pulling out here. And I know you've got folks from all sorts of cities and states coming, that those folks want to get involved in their backyard. And I was just kind of curious with that, like have you seeing this development nationwide? Are you getting people that are, sending in as a landowner, as a land, access seeker? Are you seeing that nationwide? Is there particular pockets that you're finding it a little bit more than others?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, this sharing land's been in existence since, we started working on it really a year ago, where we made it, where we plan to make it public. So it was really in February at Pheasant Fest where we announced it. And the more private land there is, the more, one, there's a need for it, and two, the more opportunity there tends to be. We have one person in Montana who's particularly interested in it. We haven't been able to kind of connect with him to the point where he's, all right, I'm ready to, go in full throttle on the whole thing. Midwest, Our area, 95% of the land, I said 65% is owned by people who don't live here. Well, 95% of it is privately owned. So if you're going to do anything in an area like this, and I think that's fairly typical in the Midwest. I mean, I know Texas is way the highest, percentage of, private land. And, you go further and Wisconsin is so interesting is like in our area, it's 95% private, but if you go up to northern Wisconsin, it's not 95% public, but there's a lot more public land. There's national forests, there's state forests, there's that sort of thing up there. But as is bemoaned now, when my dad was hunting and when he was in his 30s and 40s and huntings, that's where you went to go deer hunting because that's where the deer were. But now because of maturity and changes and everything, and then management, and then just sort of the nature of white-tailed deer, now they're all down here. Not that those deer moved down here, but the expansion of the herd and all of that. And then they find these great niches and that's where they live. So it's really, that's really interesting. There's been interest in New York State, Pennsylvania. There's some interest in landowners in California, which we find to be really curious. There's a guy in Washington State moving them along the process of, sending it in. So right now, most of our, we have a half a dozen land owners in Wisconsin that are in the program and that we're currently matching them with access seekers. We get plenty of access seekers, believe me. So
I'd imagine, yeah.
So the process is fairly simple. If you're a landowner who's interested in this, you go on to sharingtheland.com and you'll see a thing said, landowners, are you interested in, getting work on your people helping with the management of your land and we can actually even help them find folks who will help develop a management program. But what we found so far is that most of the folks who are interested in sharing the land have a management plan and they're going, this is a lot of work. And so they have work that needs to be done and they're looking for a way of getting that done. And there isn't a whole lot of there aren't a whole lot of businesses out there that are planning that are providing land management contracting services. And in some of these cases, a landowner may even be able to be in a program and have the like a EQIP or CSP or CRP or whatever, some of the federal land management programs that you can get into that sharing land people can actually help them with that the landowner can get paid for because it's a contract and the government doesn't care how the work gets done. They just want to get it done. Anyway, so that's one of the things where there's landowners who have a management plan in place. That seems to be one of the things that's happening. They realize they need help. Some are younger landowners, but they've almost already started in the process. Like you and Matthew, like I got a buddy who comes out and helps me. And, it's like, this is our group. And in fact, you are doing sharing the land, right? Just because you're not doing it through our program. So a landowner goes on and they fill out this cooperating land profile, and it kind of talks about the land, shows us where it is, tells how many acres there are, what kind of work they need done, what kind of access they'd be willing to trade, and if they have any restrictions on. Well, I know we have one who really wants people to come and deer hunt, but they don't want any turkey hunters because they like ground nesting birds, and so they don't want to. They don't want to do that. And I know a couple of the access seekers are like, well, I'm kind of interested in that place, but they don't want turkey hunting. I'm like, well, then go for deer hunting anyway, and work that arrangement out. And so that's one, and that's really what the landowner does. And looks like a kind of a resume. You can go on there and see an example of our farm on our website. And then on the other side of it, the conservation resume, the access seeker fills that out, and actually landowners do too, or can also. And that really talks about, it's a resume, right? And talks about who you are as a person and what you know and what you would like to know and what your aspirations are and what you'd be willing to do and that sort of thing. And we want that to be a living document, like any resume would be, that as someone learns more skills, they can put that on there. I mean, if you go to UW Extension chainsaw safety class and go through that, about chainsaw safety, put that on there, landowner's going to go, It's like any resume. The more stuff you have on it, the more desirable you are to the employer, or in this case, the landowner. Interestingly, so those two documents come to us, and right now we're manually sorting them. And I got to tell you, folks, it takes a lot. Okay. Because I'm trying to not. I mean, I got a stack of them right here, and I still kind of old school. I print stuff off, and I'm trying to. Okay, well, these access seekers are in that area. Oh, and those skills match up. Ultimately, what we want, and we're actually working with a web dev. That's a web developer, for those of you who don't know the lingo. Working with a web dev to put together and Onyx is helping us with this too, the mapping company, the app company.
Who's one of your sponsors?
Who's one of our sponsors, along with Map My Ranch, I might have.
Great companies.
Great companies.
Both of those are great companies. And very different. That was so fun going through that whole process, talking with them. And, and Onyx is a major sponsor of us. Not that you guys aren't a major sponsor, but you're sponsoring in a different way. And it's like, do I have to be exclusive to one or the other of these? And the guys from Onyx are like, no, man, we don't print maps and do that whole thing like those guys do. That's cool. Go ahead. And I'm like, perfect. And I'm so excited to get started now with getting our other landowners maps, and the one that I sent you, and
right.
it's just, I mean, we don't want to be giving those maps out. I just went down a rabbit hole, didn't I?
It's all good. It's all connected.
Yeah, it's all. So that's what a great thing to be able to offer a landowner. I mean, one of our biggest tools is on the wall of the farmhouse is this big laminated map of. It's an aerial photograph of contours and stuff, and your company offers those things. So when I offered that to Doug and Mary Kritz Gerlach, they were like, "Wow, yeah, we've always wanted one of those." So they're all excited about it. Now you with her, right? No, she's like, "Make sure they got the creek in the right valley, because it's not, it's so funny." But what a great thing to be able to offer, but it's also a tool. That's what's so important.
Such a great tool. Such a great tool.
It really is. It's a great tool. So, oh man, another rabbit hole. Where do the people come from? The process is cumbersome right now. What we're doing with this web development guy, Onyx, is, because I look at this, as you probably would, George, from a landowner's perspective, right? Well, I want to be able to sort through all of these things. And so, somebody tells me I have room for 2 people. Well, I want to send them 6 resumes, right? Just like, I mean, it's just not, this isn't, none of this is new stuff. This is just like applying things from life, into it. And Jared Larson, who works with us from Onyx, he goes, well, hey, man, I look at this from the access seeker standpoint, and here's what we'd like to help you with. One of the things, and that is, if you go on Onyx now, they do a 3D map that you don't print it, but it's on your screen or whatever. And so you can, and I was doing it on my laptop here, and I'm looking at it, and he goes, so imagine this. We'll isolate a property that, for it, and before any of the they can get any of the information about them, they'll just go, you'll kind of, what we would like to have is an app or whatever on our webpage. You'd slide over the state of Wisconsin, and it'll show you which counties there's opportunities for as an access seeker. So the access seeker looks and they go, well, I'm not interested in going up north, or I am interested in going up north. And then they can go and look at the property, and before they know anything about the landowner or any of that kind of stuff, that they look at a property and go, oh yeah, that's cool. I like the contours. I like the opportunity. I see what's there. I would be interested in that. And then they see what still not the personal information or any of that of the landowner, but what opportunities there are and what the landowner wants. And so all of a sudden we have people sort of self-selecting themselves, rather than me sitting here reading through these conservation resumes and stuff. So then they go, I'm going to send that to that landowner, and landowner can be doing the same thing. There's but it's a big old program, as you can imagine, which means web development and which means money. And but we're working on that. So the process will become more streamlined and people would be self-selecting. And what an interesting, I mean, it's just like, this is one of the coolest things that I've learned in this whole thing is I'm gonna keep looking at this from the landowner standpoint. I should be trying to look at this from the access point too, because it makes no sense for me to send a resume to a landowner from someone who's not interested in going there. And yeah, it's a fairly comprehensive list of interests and where and and all that kind of stuff. But I've had access seekers say, I'm interested in going anywhere. I'm like, well, it doesn't really, be more specific, please. I mean, I had one gal that's like, she's listed like 7 states because she wants to travel and hunt. And well, that's not really the point either, right? That you're just going to run around and go to different places and hunt there once. That's right. Kind of a different setup. That we're trying to develop more of a connection to area and community. But
building that relationship
and building
with
that
the landowner.
relationship. Yeah. And developing that. So it's going to be interesting to see that shake out. And on the other hand, that might be perfectly viable for some people too.
Sure.
Like one of the things that I dig, man, is that is meeting different people. And like seeing, what that's all about. So I'm not against like just having 1-time or 2-time people. I've had some folks who've come and hunted and they're like, well, I feel really bad. You invited me here to hunt and I haven't really done anything yet. And I was like, well, wait a minute. You're coming here and you're hunting during a period of, and I want antlerless deer shot. And that is a concept. That's, so if we look at the number one question being, what is your contribution to conservation? Well, on the Duren farm, killing a doe is a contribution to conservation, and taking proper care of it and getting it tested for CWD and, butchering it and, going through that whole process. And, if you choose to eat it, if it's got CWD, fine. I mean, that's your choice. Personally, I don't do that. People can, kind of go through that whole process. And that's pretty cool. I've had several people here who've not really done any work on the farm at all, but I want deer killed and I want them to do it in a thoughtful and respectful way. Every one of those people, I guess maybe I know how to choose people. I mean, I feel it pretty quick about a person. Every one of them has said, I really appreciate that. And really grateful that you allowed me to come out here and harvest a doe or antlerless deer. And, we went through that whole process. Now, really, what can I do to come and help?
I think one of the beautiful things about that is not everyone has $5,000 to $10,000. They're just going to put out there for a lease. I mean, there's a lot of people who have skills and just able bodies who can develop that relationship with that landowner. And there's that bartering system. They can come out and do whatever work is needed. They can perform whatever skill if they're a carpenter or plumber, or even in my case, like I'm an architect. Maybe there's something that I could help design on one of these ranches or farms. So it's a great way, I think, also where money doesn't have to be involved always. You can go to the classic barter system.
And when I was a kid, money has only come into hunting, I don't know, in the last 25 years when leasing. I don't know. I mean, I don't know about Texas. I realize everything. Man, my experience with Texas, everything's different down there.
Everything's bigger.
Well, I don't know if I guess it's bigger too, but it sure is different. I mean, than what I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's like, something to learn here. I've been down there. I was down for a CWD. I spoke at a CWD symposium, I don't know, before COVID. Like that's how we mark time, right? Pre and post.
Right. Yeah, pre-COVID.
And it was just a real interesting experience for me, and met people who were very much, landandowners who were very much like me, and then met landowners who they weren't interested in what I had to say because they got big fences and they're doing this way, and it's very focused on a particular way, which I was like, oh, well, explain it to me then. I mean, I'd like to learn about it. And so it was an interesting thing to learn about too. Because what the hell, I'm there for 4 or 5 days. I'm not changing anybody's mind, right? I mean, and so, and even if you were trying to, the first place you got to start is understanding where they're coming from. So yeah, that whole part of hunting that's changed to the value. I mean, access has so much value. I was just talking with some of the folks about the Leopold program, the Riley Game Cooperative. Well, why did it end if it was such a great idea? Well, Leopold died, and he was the driving force behind it. A little thing called World War II kind of got in the way there for a while. Yeah, but the third big thing was access wasn't a problem. It really wasn't a problem. You could kind of knock on the door and go in. And there's still a fair amount of that in parts of the country. Not for deer. And boy, turkeys are getting more, it's getting more in this area, turkey hunting is more controlled and all of that. And I do that too. But then the other part of it is the mentality of, well, it is private land. And you might believe in the North American model of conservation, which I do, and that idea that the game belongs to the people, but the land don't. The land where it lives don't. And so let's, think about that. And Leopold said a really cool thing. God, I just read his stuff all the time and explain a little bit more about Leopold after a while if you want to, but he said that one of the things he said when he was working on private land conservation is conservation will ultimately come down to rewarding the private landowner for conserving the public's resources. And he was speaking at that time specifically about a project called Coon Valley, and it was all contour stripping and better farming practices so there wasn't erosion, and then stream bank protections and that kind of stuff. And those ideas that he really started are what became the NRCS programs that we all know and love now, if you're a landowner, right?
Right.
Conservation Reserve Program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, EQIP funding, and then public access seekers like the Voluntary Public Access Program and the walk-in stuff. Which I find to be, pretty interesting, that this was his idea. And then ultimately he saw what one of the problems was with that. And I get this, that if you sign up for a program and then you're obligated to manage it in that way for 10 years, what happens when that 10 years is up and now you're no longer in the program? And Leopold also said, I saw private landowners who, once the money wasn't there anymore, just went back to the same old practices. That's where philosophically he started thinking and developing this whole idea of the land ethic, that rather than rewarding or incentivizing, that it should be a philosophy and ethic. And that's the part that fascinated me. I remember before I said that Leopold was 61 when he died. I'm 63. And if I'm anything now, I'm becoming more and more a philosopher than anything, right? My whole conservation mantra, it's not ours, it's just our turn. I came up with that probably almost 20 years ago now. And, we only started putting it on t-shirts a few years ago,
and I think that's a great story, which kind of ties in. Could you kind of talk us through about how that, I know that quote came from an experience of what you were doing on your family land that was multi-generational, a project that kind of reaches back to your great grandparents, if I'm correct.
Yeah. I bet you really related to that because of being a multi-generational landowner as well. Again, about 20 years ago, about 25 years ago, I began to be more involved because I was unfortunately, my youngest brother was killed in a car accident, and he was actually living on the farm, and so the farm was sort of taken care of. Matt was out there living there, and it wasn't a producing dairy farm anymore. It was in CRP, and it was a conservation property. And then he died, and then sort of the whole basket got overturned. Like, well, now what are we going to do with this place? And my folks, as you can imagine, were devastated by the loss of their youngest child. And my dad said to me, I need you to get involved with it. And I was living in Madison, an hour and a half away. And he says, it would be great if you could be more involved with this now. Well, I had been doing conservation work for other people in other parts of the country and, New England, and then coming to Door County. And then So yeah, I mean, even to this day, one of the guys who works with me says, man, it sure would be nice to be able to spend as much time on your property as we do on other people's property working on stuff. Anyway, so I started to get more involved with it. And one of the big things is to have a forest management plan in the modern sense. And in Wisconsin, it's called a managed forest law plan, or you might know it on a national level as it's an EQIP funded thing, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the phrase right now, but it's a management plan for both your forest and your whole property. Anyway, and you can get some partial funding for that. So there were reasons for us to develop this managed forest law plan. And so I was working with a guy who's become a dear friend of mine, county forester, works for the state. And he came out to the farm and we had developed the plan. I developed a plan with a private forester who we paid to put that together. And Mike had come out, and Mike Finley is his name, and this county forester, and he came out to check the markings of the trees for a cut that we were going to do as a part of the plan that we had developed. And Mike and I had become fairly close by then, and we were walking through the woods, and he was like, I think they've done a really nice job of this and that, and there's just a few individual trees, and we were done with our review of it, and we're walking out. And I can tell you where we stopped up on this hill right before you start to come down. And we're kind of looking out all over it and paused to have a drink of water. And he said, I have to tell you, this is a real aggressive program, this shelterwood harvest, to regenerate red and white oaks on this property that were the ones you're cutting were saplings when your great grandparents bought this place. And now you're cutting their trees. But what you're doing is planning for 100 years down the road for there to be another, to be trees like that here again. And that's a hard thing to do. And I just really applaud that your family is willing to do this, and that you're the one who's managing for it and all of that. And George, I feel like at that moment, my great grandparents and my grandparents and my parents were standing there with me, or were all around me. I mean, if you could ever feel something like that, I did. And because I'd stood in that spot with my grandfather, I had stood in that spot with my father, who was still alive at the time. But I was like, but I think about, well, you fall down the hill and die, you're gone. And that land is still there. So as the steward of that land, I said, I just feel like it's not ours. It's just our turn. And Mike looks at me and he goes, you got to write that down. I like that. And so I did. And I think that the idea is that we're honoring the past, planning and working in the present for the future. Mike said another thing to me. It was funny because I'm working with a new county forester now. Mike's, as a guy like that, you would think, is like upper management in DNR forestry. And he still comes, we still check in, and we became friends, as I said. But I was telling the forester yesterday that I was in the woods with, as she was explaining about some of the practices and some of the harvests that we were talking about. And I was like, one of the things that Mike said to me, was that, in forestry, it's not so much what you take, it's what you leave. And she goes, Mike is a very wise man. What a great way to be able to summarize something that can be really complex, right? Forest management. And so, I said before, I'm becoming more and more a philosopher. Well, this is a great example of, the philosophy of it. And Leopold's land ethic, we are a part of an ecosystem. And when we realize that we are a member of it, not the master of it, that's when we start to take the best care of it. Well, he was much more eloquent about all of that stuff. And I broke it down to a bumper sticker,
Well, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to have read everything that he's written, but just some of the stuff that I've skimmed, Well, I mean, one of the biggest things one of the biggest takeaways from him, in my opinion, is, again, I've said it before on this podcast already, the immersion, like really getting yourself into these environments, because you guys are talking about stewardship of your own properties and land. I mean, I'm just somebody who tags along, and I feel that myself. I mean, like every bit that I put into helping George with his property, I feel like, I know I know his daughters, and eventually hope to know their kids, and like, these are like I have a sense of like, okay, like everything we're doing here, I'm helping him with, is like something that somebody can enjoy later. And I think part of that is just the Native Americans had that sense of like more communal awareness of land and what we leave behind. And so, I think these philosophies can spill over to your friends and family as well. And, it's an interesting point of view sitting here with you two guys who are fifth generation landowners, and I can still get a sense of that from just being adjacent, and it has that, like what Leopold said, get yourself in there, immerse yourself into the wilderness.
It's well, as my friend Adam said, it was the thing that he enjoyed the most of it. Steve Rinella said one time, he was talking about Mark Kenyon versus Doug Duren, not versus, but the differences in
the ultimate battle.
Yes. Well, I'd kick his ass.
I know. No offense, Mark. No offense, Mark.
Yeah. He's just too nice of a guy. I still got that mean streak is what it comes down to. But he was like, Mark thinks about, or Doug thinks about land and the land that whitetails are on and all the other things that are going on that land. And he works at that 365 days a year, thinks about it and works about it all the time. And Mark thinks about big giant bucks. And I love the guy, by the way. I mean, he's actually become one of my favorite people in the outdoor world, because he's part of why is because he's smarter than a whip, but also I think part of that smartness is that he's learned a lot, and he's becoming more philosophical too, and he sees more and more all the time. I mean, first of all, the book that you were just quoting, I mean, it's a wonderful piece of writing, that wild country. But yet here's a guy who's appreciating both ends of it, right? I mean, I've done a lot of, I've spent a lot of time on public land, and I've done work on public land too, trail work and that kind of stuff. But and I have to remember that sometimes. Whereas it seems like he's just been going down those paths on a parallel basis for a long, long time, both private and public. And the fact that, well, he had kids, and that started to change him. And I'd like to think that I had a little bit of an influence on him, and this thoughtfulness and working with him on the Back 40 project, and how we approached that. And, I'm looking at it from a different perspective. One, it's not my job that was his focus of his job whereas I looked at it from, well, you're a land management client. I'm doing a consultation here. And I gave them I did a report on it just like I would for other clients, and kind of blew him away. But he's like, this is going to stay with the property too. It's interesting seeing all of that. And I have a lot more interest. I don't know if respect is the right word, because I don't know that that's a fair thing, but I have a lot more interest in people that have that wider view than those who have the narrow view.
Yeah, no, I think that's a super important thing. Kind of to rewind that back, when you were talking about Steve Rinella, there was actually a quote that I heard him speak about you, and I wanted to read that, and then have a question for you on that. For those that don't know, Steve Rinella, he's a best-selling author. He's the juggernaut behind the MeatEater show and podcast, and this is what he had to say about Doug. So Doug has spent his life observing a few hundred acres of land with intense love and interest. But instead of withdrawing hermit-like into that familiar space, he has taken his learnings about his land and his people and actively searched out ways to apply them elsewhere in a helpful, constructive, and collaborative manner. I can promise you that anyone who spends a day with Doug will view the earth more tenderly and with greater reverence, which one I thought was an absolutely beautiful, and from my experience and our conversations and time together, I believe it's spot on. And I kind of wanted to ask how you first got involved with, Steve Rinella, and then eventually working with in collaboration with MeatEater and some of their, TV show and the podcast, as well as Stars in the Sky.
There's a lot there, but let me first comment about what he said about me there. My friend Nick Butler, or who has become my friend, Nicholas Butler, he's a best-selling novelist, and he wrote an article for me, or about me, I should say, not for me, for Wisconsin People and Ideas magazine. And he asked if there would be someone that I would be willing to introduce, anyone that I'd introduce him to that would be able to talk about me. And I introduced him to my friend Pat Durkin, the outdoor writer, and Mike Finley, this forester, and a couple of other people in conservation that I worked. And then I said, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, Steve Rinella, but maybe he'll take a swing at it too. And after all these years now, we're on year 14, I think, of knowing each other. Steve and I have a very different relationship than we did when we first started, and it's a deeper one and all of that, and that kind of sums it up. But Nick sent me an email and said, "Oh, Steve got back to me and sent me some really good stuff about you." And I was like, "Oh, great." And I didn't ask what it was or anything, but I sent Steve a message and said, "Hey, thanks. That author mentioned that you had taken the time to give him something." He goes, "Oh yeah, Dougie, I shined you up real good." He's just so funny that way, and I think that's one of the reasons that he and I get along, is because we have similar senses of humor. So, 15, 16 years ago, my wife and I were driving our Prius up to the Alternative Energy Fair up in mid-state. And because we were looking at building a house, and it was an energy fair. So we're going to go and see about solar panels and all this different types of building and stuff. Sure. And on the way up there on a Friday afternoon, we're listening to this public radio show called Food Friday, with the host's name was Jean Faraka, and she was very, I just always enjoyed her show. She had a show on public radio here in Wisconsin called Here on Earth, and it was syndicated nationwide. But anyway, those public radio voices, don't you?
I sure do.
And they have that, here today on Food Friday, we're speaking with a man named Stephen Rinella. And Stephen has written a book called A Scavenger's Guide to Haute Cuisine. And, it was his first book. And so she goes on and then.
One of my favorites.
It's a great
book.
Love it.
And one of the cool things for me about that book is that I ended up meeting and getting to know several of the people that are a part of it, particularly the Laytons up there in Alaska, and Joan is no longer with us. But anyway, so it's like, and then when Steve comes on, it's like, yeah, hey, Gene, he's got that Michigan voice. And so but he's obviously very well spoken and thoughtful and all. But anyway, so all the way up, we're listening to this radio show, and it was just really interesting. And I was like, we pull into the parking lot, and I sit in the car a little bit longer, and I took out a sticky note. My wife, who's highly organized, had sticky notes in the car, and I wrote on it Stephen Rinella, and put stuck it to the dashboard of the Prius. And then we went off and enjoyed the Alternative Energy Fair Friday and Saturday, and that was on the dashboard. Saturday evening, you look like this is a detail that you might enjoy, George. There was a band playing called Otis and the Alligators to close the thing, and it was a blues band, kind of a high energy blues and R&B band, right? Otis and the Alligators. And my wife and I were just dancing up a storm on uneven ground in this tent. And I woke up the next morning at the hotel room and my left knee was the size of a basketball.
Oh, no.
And I had done something, right? And we were, and then the thing was over with. So we were going home. And so we stop and get ice, and I pack the thing. She drives and pack the thing in ice on the way home. We stop at the pharmacy and get a pair of crutches, because clearly I'm going to end up having surgery here. Something's going to happen, right? Something bad has happened. We get home, and there we are in our Prius sitting in the driveway. And she goes, look, just go and get inside and I'll get the stuff in. And, bless her. She's a wonderful woman for putting up with me for 20 years now. I think she's also within earshot over there. So I'm hoping she's hearing all this.
We can always play this back for her. If not, she can tune in later. It's there.
Anyway, so I, on my crutches, and I go hobbling into the house. I'd left the door open and her door was open, and the wind blew through, and that sticky note went like this. I never thought to pull it off, just like, oh,
right.
And Trish sees it, goes over in the yard and picks it up. She goes, oh, here's that note about that guy that we're listening to up there on Friday. I'm like, yeah, okay. So I go inside, and I realize I'm going to be laid up here a little bit. And as it turned out, I ended up having to have some surgery later, but it wasn't right then. It was just, I had really damaged some cartilage, but not that bad apparently.
ACL, MCL, what was it?
No, it's all my, the Highland cartilage. I think it was called Highland cartilage. Made it torn loose, and yeah, it was damaged. Yeah. And it was the second, I ended up having the second surgery. So my ligaments are all good, but the cartilage is just bone on bone in there now. And it's really, I'm still without a knee replacement, but that day seems like it's coming pretty soon. Anyway, so I said, hey, honey, I'm going to be here on the couch with my knee in ice. Could any chance you could, at those time we had a Borders book. So we were living in Madison. There was a Borders bookshop down the street a little ways. And she goes, yeah, I'll go down there. And by God, they had both Scavenger's Guide and American Buffalo, which is what he was on there to promote. But all she wanted to talk about was the first book. And at the end, he said, hey, Gene, I got this other book just came out.
By the way, yeah.
So anyway,
the guide is so good.
So she gets so Trish goes down and gets those books for me. I'm laying there on the couch, and we got my knee packed in ice for 3 or 4 days. And I read both those books cover to cover. And I just couldn't put them down. And after I got done, and thought about it a little bit more, and I kind of went back, because some of those chapters in Scavenger's Guide are so interesting to read, like about the eels or about the Laytons up in Alaska, or, like his whole thing about sparrows and all the different stuff.
Well, just the way he's feathering these stories together, just incredible writing. Like, it is really good writing.
And it really reminded me of Ian Fraser, the writer who wrote the book Great Plains. I would say is his masterpiece. It was a New York Times bestseller. And anyway, so I literally go online, and it was 14 years ago, and I go American Buffalo, Stephen Ranella, and it pops up. And there's this website, like a 2-page website, American Buffalo. And I read the thing, and it doesn't really tell you, oh, here's like another little thing he wrote, but nothing else. And so in the contact part of it, I said, really enjoyed the books. Really reminds me of Ian Fraser with a little bit of Jim Harrison thrown in there. I like adventure books. I like how these things are sort of like you were saying, where it was sort of this and then that, right? Sort of going back and forth in both of the books. And described that to him. And, it was just a piece of fan mail, email. But thinking that some schlub from the publishing company is going to read this thing, right? I figured he was a big deal. Said, is there anything else that the author has written, articles, that sort of thing? Where can I find more of his work? And he emails me back, hey, man, which is how he started every conversation we had for the longest time. Hey, man. Now he says, bubbly Doug. But and then we started a conversation and pen pals via email that went on for from whenever that was, almost for a year. So that was 2008, and then in the fall of 2009, it was the fall of 2008 when that energy fair happened, and then we were just corresponding for several months. And not time would go by, and I would write a lot more than he would, but but then he'd get back to me and we'd talk about it. And then I said in an email, hey man, if you ever want to whitetail hunt in Wisconsin, let me know. By that time I had told him about the farm and stuff. And his response was really ? When ? And on New Year's Day of 2010, I picked him up at the Dane County Airport, and we had a miserable 4 or 5 days together because we had a bunch of snow, which was great, and there were a lot of deer around, but then it rained and there was this like crust of ice on everything, and all the deer that were on our farm just moved to where there was standing corn. They just got out of there, I mean, you could literally see the exodus in the snow. And we ended up getting the deer, and a little buddy of mine, Pat Durkin was one of them, hunted with us and stayed at the farmhouse. We had this great weekend or 3 days or whatever it was at the farm, just talking about all kinds of stuff, and not all of it about hunting and fishing or, any of that. We were talking about Naomi Watts at one point, I remember, the actress. I had given him a tour of the area. You'd be interested in this, Matthew. Frank Lloyd Wright was born right down the road from me here, and in Richland Center, but his masterpiece Taliesin is about 40 miles away, and 40 miles the other way is Leopold's shack. And those two,
I've been to Taliesin West. I mean,
I've been to Taliesin.
I mean, not
too.
West. I'm sorry, East, like where you are.
Oh yeah, so you were very close. Yeah, you were very close to us. I drive by there on a regular basis. I gave him that tour and I talked about the driftless area. He's like, what? And say what? And I remember talking about like watersheds and that sort of stuff. He goes, I grew up in Michigan, man. Nobody knows that kind of stuff about our area. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just really interesting to me. And so those were the kind of conversations that we were having, and then popular culture stuff. If you watch the episode with Helen and Brittany and Steve and I, we take those gals hunting. Mm-hmm. And if you watch at the end, we're sitting around the campfire and Steve starts singing. And I look at him and I was like, it just wasn't registering to me. I mean, I was exhausted because we'd been all this. And then they said, okay, we're done. And just go off and everybody just kind of relaxes. And I looked over him and I said, were you just singing Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd? And he was. When I was a child, I had a fever, and it was just like, man, you can't sing with that shit. Because, two balloons. Yeah. And, but it was hilarious. And so there's been all these kind of ongoing cultural references, that those are the things that because I'm not a great hunter or outdoorsman. Like, I'm more of a conservationist like him or Cal or Yanni or anything like that. So what was your question?
Well, we're in the middle of it too, I guess. I was just kind of curious how you had your start working with them, because I view you as a conservationist, and I mean in my level of who you are and the stretch of your influence, like I look at you in that Leopold like classification. I find you to be absolutely inspiring towards folks who want to learn about conservation, about land, wildlife management, your information about CWD. And I definitely applaud, all the things you've done. I'm very appreciative of what you've shared. And I think a lot of people, they have learned about you through the MeatEater platform.
Sure.
Because of its, influence out there in the world and how vast it is right now. And so I was kind of curious, as far as like how you got involved in that, because while you're not maybe an every week contributor, you're still a contributor. And, I think your name is dropped on that podcast more than anybody else's I've ever heard. It seems like there's always a Doug Duren quote or thought, or, he would disagree, but whatever it is. And so, you find, I find that's it's interesting. I just kind of wanted to let listeners know kind of how you came about being involved in that. And, now hearing your first meeting with Steve, I can see how it would unfold, but if you'd like to talk more about it, I'd like to hear that.
Well, it's funny because, I thought that, this was cool. We had fun for that weekend and stuff. And one of the first things that Steve asked me when we got to the farm, and I was like, "Hey, you take your stuff in." And he goes, "I said we had stopped at our house in Madison, and he understood the whole thing about how I didn't live there, and like we're shuffling around. I got to get turn the furnace up and get all that kind of stuff." He goes, "Hey, man, is there anything I can help you with?" And so I said, "Yeah, you can do this," and I don't even remember what it was, but he goes, and then he gets done with that, and he's like, "So do you need anything help around here on the farm or anything?" And he ended up helping me load. I said, "Oh, Monday before we leave, I'm actually sending a couple of steers to be butchered. And so you can help me, get them in, and, we'll calm them down, and then we'll get them in." And so he helped me with that, getting shit on him, and he didn't care. And the point was that he was immediately like, "What can I do to help? What can I do to be involved?" Asking me a lot of questions about the farm and that kind of stuff. But here's kind of a fun detail. So those cattle went down. He goes, "What's happening with them?" I was like, "Well, they're being butchered, and I've sold most of it. I direct market beef to people, so they'll go and pick it up there and sell it on." Anyway, he goes, "Huh, people eat, do people take everything?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Like the liver and heart, and I'm particularly interested in the tongues." I was like, "I tell you what, man, I can say this without hesitation. If you want the tongues from those 2 steers, you can have them.
They're yours."
And he's like, "Well, I'd really like them." So I called the locker and said, "Hey, can we get the tongues from those 2 steers? We're gonna," and we shipped them on. No, we sent them on Sunday, and they were butchering them Monday morning, or killing, cooling them on Monday morning. If you know about, you got to kill them, have them, and then hang them for a while on Monday, and we'll come down Monday afternoon on our way to the airport. And they're like, "Yeah." So we go down, and sure enough, they got them for us. And he's like all excited about getting these tongues. I'm like, "I ate tongues."
Hopefully someone took the barbacoa.
They what?
The cheek meat. Hopefully someone took.
Oh yeah, that always happens. Yeah. Anyway, so really, so he takes them back to, and at that time he was living in Brooklyn, New York, and he had said, "Oh, I got this chef friend of mine, and we've been like experimenting." I'm like, "Okay." But I was like, "Man, poor people ate tongues." And we had to eat our tongue, the cattle, we ate everything, right? But it wasn't everything like, oh boy, we're having tongue. It's sort of like you were talking about the Alaska episode earlier. And if you remember, Mark shot his caribou, and we went down, and Steve's like, "Oh, you got to try this. This is like the cookie dough from behind the eye. It tastes boy, isn't that good?" And I'm like, it's sort of the same thing. Okay, I can appreciate it for what it is, but it's like, I'm not going to say, "Let's kill a caribou so we can pull that fat out from behind its eyes."
I don't need the nourishment. I live, in the main 48 states.
So, from an experience standpoint, that was one thing. But then the tongue thing, and that was sort of the way I felt about tongue too. And so he took those back with him, and like, I don't know, 10 days, 2 weeks later, FedEx man shows up, and here's his box from Steve with a card in it. And it's, "Hey man, thanks again for the great weekend, yada, yada." And then he explains the process that he and the chef went through with brining and smoking and turning it into this. So he says, "Slice it thin, put a little mustard on a cracker. You're going to love it. It's going to be the best, And tongue," he says, and then he says, "Tongue, the taste that tastes you back." So not sure that makes sense, but I thought it was funny at the time. And so that was kind of it. And then we stayed in touch, and big changes in my life. The company, the engineering firm that I was working for, about that same time, was 2008. There was an economic downturn, and the office that I was working, we were a satellite office of this engineering firm up in they're in there like, "We're going to close this office. We'd like you to move to Stevens Point, where the main office is." And I'm like, "I'm not going to do that. I can't do it." At that same time, my wife said, "Well, didn't you want to do it? You wanted to go out on your own again anyway. Maybe this is the time to do that. Maybe this is the universe doing that." And she worked at the university and had health insurance. And I'm like, "Okay, that's, I think, what I'm going to do." My sister my older sister got breast cancer and she needed help. And my parents were both, I mean, it's only 12 years ago or something like that. And they were, I'd been more involved with the farm, but they were, they're getting quite a bit older and failing. I could see they were going to need help. And how am I going to make a living and still do this? And through that whole thing, there's Steve too. And I don't know if you remember, he had a show on the Travel Channel for one season. It was called The Wild Within. And he calls me up. I'm working for this soccer facility. It was one of my clients, still my best client. Love people at Madison Area Youth Soccer Association. And he called. I remember him calling me up because I'm over there and I'm kind of in the middle of one of these. Man, I got to get some more work, and all the stuff when you're first starting a business like that. He calls me up. I'm at the soccer park, and he goes, "Hey, man. So I'm doing this show, and it's going to be called The Wild Within. It's on the Travel Channel, and I got to have 14 treatments." And I'm like, like I knew what a treatment was. And
are you sick?
Right. I got to have 14 treatments for 14 shows, and we're going to do 10. But I really want to do one based around that whole driftless area, Eldo Leopold, Frank Lloyd Wright, come to your farm. We'll do some hunting. We'll do all this. I mean, it'd be a great episode. So can you help me with that? And I said, yeah, but you're going to have to tell me what a treatment is first. And then he says, it's, and he explains it. So I just provided him with information, right? And he put it together. But it was super cool. And it was like, wow, what if that worked out? That would be cool. So then, and he goes, this is one of my favorite ones. I really want to do this one. And then he calls me up and says, oh, you also have to understand that I don't have control over this. I don't own this show. So even though I get a vote, Travel Channel and this company and that company, so I'm one of 5 votes or something. I'm like, yeah, no, I get it. This is fun to do this. He shows me the treatment. I wish I'd have kept that. I probably have it in an email somewhere, but calls me up and says, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. We aren't going to do that. They didn't think that Cazenovia was exotic enough.
It sounds exotic.
And I said, really? Exotic, huh? Well, there's this little town up the road here called Yuba. We could go up there. Because I'll tell you what, that was exotic up there. And then Wild Within, ironically, I said, well, which one did they choose over that? And he goes, well, we're going to Maui. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I kind of get it. But that's the episode where he stabbed the pig, which was kind of the end of the episode, the end of the thing. And the other thing that happened was one of the cameramen got hurt real bad when they were working. They were doing stuff in the water and whatnot. And it was just kind of interesting that was kind of that episode sort of went south on him in a lot of ways. Anyway, he then called me soon thereafter, after that, and he told me the show was canceled. And he's like, but I got some writing stuff that I'm doing. And, those guys at Vortex that you told me about, you think you can introduce me to them? Because, would they give me like binoculars or something that I'd have it in a, product placement. They'd be in the pictures and that sort of stuff. He says, you probably know how this stuff works. I'm like, I don't know. I didn't know what a treatment was, man. But I said, yeah. So I introduced him to my buddy, Seamus Terry, who's the director of sales at Vortex. And that's where they started talking about actual sponsorship, more beyond, just giving them a pair of binoculars or whatever to show up in a picture. And it was really pretty interesting because I think I told you this earlier, maybe before we were recording, where Seamus calls me up and he goes, hey, so this Ranella guy, we got like some business with him and we got to have some meetings and it's going to take like half a day or a day, but dude wants to come like 4 days to go hunt with you. Is that cool? And I'm like, oh yeah, no, it's great. He actually mentioned it to me and then what we did with that was then brought a couple of the Vortex guys up. So they all hunted with us. And then eventually we essentially did the same thing or recreated that. We just did another hunt very similar. And that was the first episode that we shot. And that first episode, was like 15 minutes of fame stuff, right? I mean, that's the way I looked at it. It's always been, I was like, I became very fond of Steve not long after meeting him. And then I just admired him so much as a writer, and then like the adventures and the stuff that he had done. And it was just really, I just thought, man, this guy's really interesting. I want to help him however I can, because it's an important voice in conservation. Sure. And I'm developing, and at the same time, all these things are developing, I'm working on developing Woodland Owners Association, Master Woodland Steward program that I'm in. I'm working with, NRCS. I'm doing naturalization and restoration. I'm doing land management. I'm doing all these things that I'm kind of involved with. And that's the kind of stuff that he was interested in. So anyway, then he calls me when they're doing he calls me and says, hey, so we're doing this thing called MeatEater. I mean, he doesn't call me much anymore. He doesn't have time. I get text messages from him. And now when he calls, I almost purposely don't pick up, just to mess with him a little bit.
Sorry, I don't have time for you.
And then I'll call him back. I said, can I call you back? That message. Anyway, and the stuff he calls me for is just these like random things too. It's like, should I be planting my pollinator seed now or doing it next spring? I'm like, and he's doing it in the mountains of Montana. I'm like, well, why are you asking me? Because I know you'll give me a straight answer. I'm like, well, I can just make some shit up for you if nothing else. But I did guide him through that pretty quickly. So we ended up having this text message exchange. I think that was the last thing that we talked about. So he lets me know that MeatEater's happening, and he goes, at some point we're going to want to do a episode on your place, but right now we got season 1 all nailed down. And I'm like, cool, man. I'm here. I'm happy to help, whatever, just happy to be here. Really appreciate it. Good luck, all of that. And then he calls me in, like January, like the second week of January, and they're out mountain lion hunting in the Southwest. And he goes, hey, this is the first year of this show. We're doing 10 episodes, and, I own the show. And we're not afraid to have skunkers, where we don't get anything. But right now it looks like we're going to have like 4. And that's just not, because they were doing 2 that were this mountain lion hunting, and they just weren't getting it.
Didn't happen. Yeah.
Didn't happen.
That happened.
Because so we were talking, is there any chance that we could come to your place? I mean, you get something going on right now, don't you? I was like, oh, yeah, we got squirrel hunting, we got rabbit hunting, and, that kind of stuff. He goes, that's what I was hoping. And remember when we shot pigeons out of your barn, that kind of stuff? That'd be just really cool to like a whole Midwestern thing, I'm like, yeah. And then I went, oh, here's something else. When are you talking about coming? And he goes, well, we'd like to do it in February, like pretty quickly. And I'm like, oh, geez, okay. And I said, oh, here's the other thing. We actually have these deer management hunts. We don't have them anymore, unfortunately, where a landowner can go in and say, I want to kill more deer on my property under the population control or CWD control thing. And we can do that. And so we can actually, he said, what? We can hunt deer? I'm like, yes. And he's perfect. So we're all excited about it. And so it was him and Mo Fallon, and Dan Doty. And you might know Mo from his work with Anthony Bourdain. He was one of the directors of photography for Anthony. And Dan is no longer, he hasn't been with MeatEater for quite a while. He's was an outdoor guide medic. And that was actually how he started. And then he was a producer for MeatEater for quite a while. But now he's got his own gig called Everyman, which is like men like figuring it out, it's sort of guidance stuff. And what Dan's doing is really cool. And they came and we shot this. I mean, it was literally just Steve and those 2 guys, and what the hell did I know? Right. And we got a deer, and we shot some rabbits, and we got a squirrel, and we did this and that. And then we shot a TRCP conservation moment about CRP and how that's helped bring back the brook trout in our area, and and all that kind of stuff. And a couple of my buddies who'd met Steve, because he'd been here at least twice before then, a couple of my buddies met him. I was like, hey, I'd really like to call those guys and have them come on. He goes, cool, and then Doty comes to me and says, how about we have a meal? We do a meal with them. And Steve's like, that's a great idea. So we made like Hassenpfeffer and venison steaks and or some other venison thing that he did, and the Hassenpfeffer, and then the squirrels that were like a Kentucky fried, chicken fried squirrel legs and this whole thing. And I invited a bunch of buddies out, and those guys are all on TV. And it was just like this really fun thing. And in the middle of it is my old man. My father sits there in the middle of the thing, and Dodie says to me, "Hey, Doug, ask your dad how he likes the rabbit." And I said, "Dad, how do you like the rabbit?" And my dad's like Mr. Natural. He goes, "Well, sits back. It's really quite good. I've never had Hassenpfeffer before, but I have had wine with rabbit. My wife used to make it for me all the time. Wine goes into the rabbit, wine goes into her. And of course, everybody laughs. And that's the end of the episode. And my father, who's no longer with us, there he is, at the end of it. I mean, it was just, for me, it was so cool that got included in the whole thing. And I thought that was it, right? I mean, I thought that's all the MeatEater shit that I was going to get to do. And so I had a party at the local bar because we got all these dudes who are in it and their kids. You're talking about earlier about involving kids, and their kids came out, and kind of they're all young men now, or young ladies. And so we had a party at a local bar, a viewing party for the whole thing. Vortex gave me like a pair of binoculars and some stuff to give away, and we do this whole thing. It was just a blast, right? And I'm like, okay, there's my 15 minutes of fame. That was great. Well, that was 10 years ago. And they've had me on a couple times since then, and I've gotten to hang out with some interesting characters, and, became friends with Joe Rogan and Brian Callen as a result of those hunts. And, still hear from those guys. And they just put out that 10th anniversary poster. I got one of them here hanging in my office, and there I am down in it. There's, I don't know how many people are on there, 10 or 12 of us, and I'm one of them. And I'm like, huh. And the guy who's their graphic designer there, I was really surprised by it. And I actually didn't even know that he was their graphic designer at the time. And I was like, he had posted it on his Instagram, and I was like, wow, it's really cool that you do that. You did that. So you contribute? He goes, actually, I work there full time now. I'm like, oh, didn't know. But he goes, I want you to know that you and Ronnie Bain were the first two that he said that need to be on the poster. So,
nice.
Yeah. So, ongoing stuff. We've been talking a little bit. I was actually texting with Corinne, the podcast producer, today. There's nothing, we don't have anything like, okay, here's what we're doing. Like last year at this time, we were actually planning a gun deer hunt with him and Ya Yang, and that didn't happen because of his schedule. It's not going to happen this year because of his schedule. And then we had Cal came here in December and we did a Cal in the Field episode on CWD and deer hunting and stuff. And I went out right after that in December and was on the podcast, but that was the last time that I was on. But I didn't. Yeah, I agree. He mentions me a lot. He's saying something about Yanni on this week's podcast, how they're always together. He goes, hang together like nuts on a dog, like Doug Duren says.
I heard that actually yesterday morning driving into work, and I was cracking up. Well, that kind of brought up two other things that, you mentioned that episode with Cal, and you're showing like the CWD dumpsters and the check-in stations there too. And from my understanding, it was about 20 years ago when CWD kind of came into your area. And how long has it been in and around your area and your awareness of it? And if you maybe rewind that back and kind of tell people a little bit about what that is, what CWD is, chronic wasting disease, and how that affects the animals, and what you're seeing in your area.
Sure. Well, chronic wasting disease, CWD, is a infectious, always fatal disease when a deer gets it. It's a prion-based disease. Prions are proteins that every mammal has. And diseases that can come from that in the humans, it's called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. So it's a transferable spongiform encephalopathy, which is the way to really sum it up. So transferable, it's a disease that can transfer from one animal to the other. Spongiform, it means it's actually makes the brain like a sponge. And encephalopathy, I'm not sure what that means. Anyway, disease that's going to kill the animal and takes about 2 years before it does, which is a kind of an insidious thing when you think about it. I was talking with a deer biologist, man. I steal this stuff from people all the time. When I hear him say something, I'm like, I'm going to remember that. And I told him I'm going to use that. And so this is the first time I am. He said, chronic wasting disease is like the Dutch elm disease in the tree world. Dutch elm disease doesn't kill all of the elms in an area. It takes the oldest ones generally. And it always has, it's always present once it's established in an area, but it doesn't ever wipe its host out completely. So far. It's interesting that I say that. There's a big elm tree right by the farmhouse that's, when I say big, not like when I was a kid that were 150-year-old trees that were just enormous. This one is for our, rather than being two people to reach around it, one person can reach around it. And that's a big elm now. Most of them get to be 12, 14 inches in diameter and they die. But they've kicked off enough seeds that more elms are growing, so the disease, which is fungal. So it's an interesting way of looking at it, right? Because chronic wasting disease is a transfer that once an animal gets it, it's going to kill it, but it's going to take 2 years. If that doe, for instance, who gets chronic wasting disease, and it goes through 2 breeding cycles, she's going to replace herself 3, 4, 5 times. So I think in the last 20 years, we've learned a lot more about that. When chronic wasting disease was first discovered out west in smaller populations of like mule deer and elk and whatnot, because they were spread out more, the disease didn't transfer as quickly. And boy, if we didn't learn anything from COVID, we know that when we crowd people where did COVID blow up? In all these high population urban areas, right? It took a long time for it to get out here. And then when it did, it didn't run rampant because people are more spread out. And of course, by then we kind of were like, oh, okay, well, if we do these things, I'm not going to get it. I got all the shots and I still haven't had it. I know people who've gone through and I've been like, I don't want to say that risky behavior, but I've been big groups of people. I've gone to conventions and stuff like that. But, with a little bit of common sense applied too, you're not, it's all of that, right?
Right.
But we didn't know anything about it at that time. And so we know if there are fewer people, members of whatever group it is together, something that's contagious in the case of COVID, or transferable in the case of, in really insidious ways in the case of CWD, the less interaction and the smaller population, the less apt it is to get past and grow. Well, in Southwest Wisconsin, there are parts of this area that have, our county has about 75 deer per square mile of habitat. So 640 acres, there's 75 deer of habitat. 85% of our county, if you're wondering, 85% of our county is considered deer habitat. So it's not like you got a pocket here of habitat here and there's some deer there, and you got a pocket over here and there's deer. It's just the whole damn thing is deer habitat. So there's a lot of there can be interaction, and then you end up with that big of a population. Once a disease like that comes in, it transfers. Can transfer pretty quickly. Well, what's quickly? Well, 20 years ago, it was discovered, and it had probably been in the area down there south of us, about 60 miles. It had probably been there for a few years. How it got there there's much speculation, everything from, deer breeders to people throwing carcasses of their elk or mule deer from out west out to Some, there are people which the evidence doesn't support this, but some of the CWD, not deniers, but who don't take it as, I think it's as concern. It just happens. It's just spontaneous. Well, you can't look at the statistics and the data and understand, believe that can be the case. And that's always been here and it's everywhere. No, you would see it if it was, especially in these populations. So it started down there. And so in 2000, all of a sudden up here in northeastern Richland County, 60 miles away, we were in the CWD management area. And we're like, holy, kind of like with COVID, when COVID first started happening, right? Oh my God, I could be wearing masks. I could be doing this thing. Because you don't know what there's all the unknowns about it. And the more time goes by, you figure out more about it all. I remember Rogan telling me, I saw him right before he got sick, oddly enough, at a show in Milwaukee, and we hung out afterwards and stuff. But one of his, he was like, oh yeah, I remember when COVID first started, we were like flushing the toilet with our feet and, like not touching anything and all of that. And now it's like, we've figured out a lot more. And of course he had his own attitudes about it all. But so my friend Mitch Baker, who's very active in chronic wasting disease and deer health concerns, as a private person like me, said, I would rather that we did everything that we could and find out that we did more than we had to, than to find out that there was so much more that we should have done. Yes. And I'm afraid that here in Wisconsin, there's so much more that we should have done. So 20 years ago, when it first started, it really was kind of scary because we didn't know what the hell are they doing? And they're down there killing semi-loads of deer. And why are they doing that? Well, it was a control measure. And guess what happened? It worked. So for 10 years, prevalence and spread just stayed pretty much down and low. The worst thing about something like that is, well, you're controlling the disease, and everybody goes like, well, what the hell's the big deal? Right? The best, one of the things that my daughter works in public health is epidemiology. And she's like, oh yeah, prevention. The weirdest thing about prevention is that when you do, people are like, well, what's the big deal? Why are you making such a big deal of this? The prevention is actually working, right? I mean, it's such an odd, juxtaposition. And I was talking with Brian Richards from the Wildlife Health Center, the emerging disease coordinator, who, as far as I'm concerned, is the person to listen to most about chronic wasting disease, because he doesn't, what's the word I'm looking for? He's not hyperbolic about it. He's just like, here's the data, here's what's happening, this is what we know, and the more data we have, the more we know, and here's what, and he just like lays it out, and he's very careful about that stuff. Anyway, we've learned so much more about it. And one of the things that Brian said was, well, yeah, we were controlling it. And then as soon as people were like, well, what's the big deal? And we're having to do all this control, and we got sharpshooters, and we're doing all this, they were limiting it to an area. And then a fellow from Texas by the name of James Kroll came up here, was hired by the state to be our deer czar, our deer trustee. And he's like, you shouldn't worry about CWD. It's going to level off at 2%. You shouldn't worry so much about deer population. You should look at it more like too many deer, not enough deer, just right. You should have these things called county deer advisory councils so that the public, and really the hunters, have influence over deer management. I happen to be on our CDAC, and I can talk about that if you want to. So all of these things started to happen, and all of a sudden, everybody heard what they wanted to hear. Don't worry about it anymore. So as soon as we stopped worrying about it, and stopped things like earn a buck to control population and the sharpshooting thing. I mean, whatever. I mean, I do think that the state made some tactical errors. They didn't make scientific errors. The policy was correct. The implementation could have been better or different, in that could have been more hunter oriented. We should have stayed with earn a buck, which was, those were political decisions. Those were not scientific decisions. Sure. And people, in Wisconsin, they've done all these things, and look, they still have it. Like, yeah, well, we stopped doing it. So about 10 years ago, when that started to change, funding was, cut and all of that, all of a sudden everything took off. And if you go on the CWD website for the state of Wisconsin, you'll see, and now James Kroll's like, yeah, CWD is a problem in Wisconsin, but it's really only 4 counties. And then but it's creeping into more counties all the way around it. And he was just on our natural resources board thing. And I mean, I get that he's really good at some parts of this, right? He knows how to grow deer. I mean, he's a biologist and ecologist. I mean, I don't mean to disparage, him too much, but when it came to the disease, he was just on our natural resources meeting. He talked for 2 hours. He never talked about CWD for more than about 30 seconds and was dismissive of it because because I think he's been proven wrong and he doesn't want to have that. And our natural resources board, or at least those who are running it, are very, they're the ones who brought him in. Some of the people that and so consequently, they're kind of putting him in a good place. And the guy's got a lot of good ideas. I actually like the county deer advisory councils a lot. I'm a landowner, I'm a DMAP member. We are working with the biologists and the foresters and whatnot for deer policy. But I think that deer policy and deer management has to be for the better of the ecosystem and be for everybody. I had a deer biologist say to me, we used to manage the resource. Now we manage the hunting experience. And those are 2 very different things.
Very.
Well, Doug, if I can ask a quick question.
Sure.
As a landowner who's had to deal with CWD and George being a landowner in a county in Texas that hasn't had an issue with CWD, although there are counties in Texas that do.
Yeah.
What if you could go back to yourself before CWD came on your property? Is there anything you can tell yourself then or to George now that you've learned over the years that I don't know if it would help him now for the future
Going forward?
Or just going forward. Yeah. What's something that you could tell us about that, in terms of preparation, if it ever came?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that's probably, when I get asked about CWD, I always say I'm not an expert.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not a scientist.
But you're still a landowner.
I'm a landowner who's had an experience and I have a perspective as a result. And smartest man I ever knew in my life was a professor of mine in college. Smartest man I knew up to that point, at least, said to me, Doug, you're beating yourself up like you think you need to know all this stuff. You don't need to know. You just need to know how to find out.
Yes.
And so that's like respecting science and experts and, seeking them out and understanding, don't go looking for someone who's just going to support your point of view, because I'll tell you what, man, if I felt like it was if it was just about me, I would just ignore CWD. We would do a heavy duty deer management if it was just about me. I'm not talking about, because I'm going to die. I'm 63 years old. 20 years from now, what's happening around here? What difference does it make? I'm not here, right?
You'll be here. You're going to be here. We're going to have you in
83
Texas in 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what I'm saying.
40 years. We'll go ahead and give you 40.
Okay. 40. Okay. Well, it's
40,
interesting.
The back 40.
This is a well, you want to talk about a rabbit hole. My great grandfather was 70 when he died. My grandfather was 80. My dad was 92. So maybe I will make it to 103, George, because it seems to keep ratcheting up there.
It's been said today.
Yeah, well,
it's happening.
If I ever have a podcast, which you asked me if I was going to write a book, I think in one of your questions, and I don't see myself writing a book, but you are not the first one who's asked me that, or I've had people give me advice that I should. One thing I thought about was having a podcast, and I don't, whether I will or not, I'm a guest on so many that it's sort of superfluous for me to have one. But if I did, it would be called, what was I talking about? Because I often have to say, what was I talking about when I get down these rabbit holes? Advice about CWD. I remember now, Matthew.
There you go.
If you don't have it, you don't want it. If you do have it, you want as little as possible. I mean, There's a bumper sticker, right? To break it down to the most basic levels. So so act accordingly. If you don't have it, and I think that if you go on any state agency's website, if you go on to the National Deer Association's website or Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, or probably the best place for information other than my website, because one of the things I do is direct you to all of those right away, is cwdinfo.org. And they'll talk about how do you prevent it from coming to your area. Well, that's why we have these transportation restrictions in where you can't take whole carcasses out of a CWD area. Well, you shouldn't even transport whole carcasses anywhere anymore, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to do that. So that's one of the big things. Don't spread it around that way. Especially if you go back to what I said before about speculating about, well, maybe that's how it got Southwest Wisconsin in the first place. And I said, well, shit, I remember when my dad used to come back from out west, when they'd bring it out, they brought the whole thing back. And then what they do with those bones, they went out in the bone pile out here where we used, for the coyotes or whatever. So stop doing that. So, so if you don't have it, you don't want it. So that's one of the things, and I know this is a sensitive subject in Texas. And I mean, I was down there for CWD. Don't move them around in the back of a truck. Don't load them up like cattle and move them around. That's another thing, especially from a facility that has it or knowingly has it. And in Wisconsin, the deer farm industry, the captive servant industry, is a pretty big business, and they actually have pretty big lobbying strength in this area too. But I'm not one of those guys who say we should shut all those things down. Not that guy. They should be willing partners in the fight against CWD. And when I say that in Wisconsin, they shouldn't be. I don't see that. And I would welcome them to be a part of it. And there's some are saying, well, here's what we're doing. We're trying to develop what we think we're with this humic acid, and we're doing this and that. And we're okay, that's fine. Experiment with that. We think that the genetic stuff, so we should be getting some of that research money. No, it's private industry, and you guys you figure that shit out on your own. That's kind of the way I feel about it. But you know what? When the state says, sort of like put your hand on your mouth when you cough, it'll help the solution. You know that one, don't you? Respect yourself kind of stuff. The industry here in Wisconsin fought double fencing around their deer farms. We're not talking about double fencing around a 10,000 acre ranch. I know you guys got big ranches down there with big high fence stuff. We're talking about 20, 40, 80, 120 acres. Single fence, square, 4-inch square fencing. Deer can't get out. But what can happen is that those deer can touch noses with deer on the outside. So double fencing is you have like the fence, and then there's like a 6-foot gap, and you got another fence around the outside of it. So control that. They fought that. Well, then I'm like, well, how sincere are you about wanting to help with this? So when this is something that you can do, what can I do to help? Right? That's what I always kind of look about. Like, what can I do to help? We, before CWD, started to really hit our deer herd hard because we saw this growth in the population. I remember talking with Steve one time about deer and there being too many deer. And he goes, from whose perspective? And then he went off on, well, from a deer hunter's perspective, there can't be too many deer. And from a, farmer's perspective, there's probably too many deer. And then from these, I was like, well, how about from the ecosystem's perspective? What's the carrying capacity? The weird thing about carrying capacity in farm country here is that I don't know what the carrying capacity is, but I can tell you this, because there's so many crops and all of that from live on. But then in the winter, there's that desert, and then they go in and decimate natural regeneration of oaks and the plants that are a part of our ecosystem. So there's a problem with the balance of the ecosystem, right? But when you've got people buying land specifically for hunting and deer hunting, that becomes a problem too, because maybe those guys are like, well, wait a minute, we can't have too many deer. But then you go and listen to my friends from National Deer Association, former QDMA. It's like, oh, well, you need to population control. and have, demographic balance and all of those things that are a part of it. But what I have found is that a lot of people who are involved with that idea of deer management, that the thing that they remember is let him go so he can grow. And then they kind of forget everything after that. Oh, except for food plots. To put in some food plots. And in Wisconsin, Southwest Wisconsin anyway, putting in food plots is like taking sand to the beach. I mean, we have got, clean farming is cleaning up. It does not. I mean, after the crops are harvested around here, there is plenty of grain left on the ground. Deer can dig through. It's Southwest Wisconsin. It's not like we have feet of snow. There's a reason we got so many freaking deer. But when they do get, deer like browse too. And so you have a lot of them, they're going to be in there browsing on, they don't browse on invasive species like multiflora rose or autumn olive or prickly ash.
They leave all those alone.
They leave all those alone. If they would eat that stuff, we'd be, we'd love it. But no, they're in there eating our oaks and our viburnums and our, dogwoods and, and all of that kind of stuff. So, and all the food plots in the world aren't going to make any difference in that regard. You might gather deer to an area because but they'll still go out and be decimating that. So there's this balance that, should be achieved. And, it's so funny because 50 years ago, when I first started deer hunting in this area, well, less than 50 years ago, because we hunted up north first. When I first started deer hunting in this area, that was a big deal to see deer and get one. And now it's like you get a buck tag and 4 doe tags, and you can go and buy as many doe tags as you want after that. And we still can't kill enough deer because goes back to like mentality, the land ethic. We need that land ethic of us. Well, what's too many deer? Those things are really important to understand that that deer are just one thing in the process. So some of the other things is if you don't have it, you don't want it. Well, so keep it out. Don't bring it in through artificial means. And then let's think about not bringing it in through the deer naturally moving out and about. Well, how do you do that? Well, you got to kind of quit worrying in an area like this. 40 acres. There's plenty of people who just own 40 acres and hunt on it here.
Sure.
Right? I mean, you get, you can't expect that you're going to have a bunch of deer on there. But then the other part of it is if you think that somehow you are going to manage for big bucks by letting that buck go on your 40 acres, no, you're not.
Too much range.
Yeah, there's just too much range. I mean, even me controlling a square mile of habitat between what we own and what I manage and have control over. We killed 40 deer in that square mile. In an area where there's supposed to be 65 to 70 per square mile. So we killed 2/3 of the deer theoretically. 3 weeks after the season, we flew it with a drone and counted 85. Nature abhors a vacuum, right?
Oh, big
so
time.
it's gotta be some of that. So, and also my point is that deer will move into an area. And of course ours is, it's conservation property. So there's reason for them to, but deer move out of high concentration areas. And if there's a high concentration area with a disease problem, which is like Southwest Wisconsin or Southwest Richland County, Southeast Richland County and Southwest Sauk County, our farm is actually right on the 2-county line, but up in the northern part of where Richland County ends right up here. And then Sauk County continues. But, in the southern part of our county, 25 miles away, over 50% of the bucks have CWD, 35% of the does, and the younger deer are now starting to follow that same thing of 25 to 30%. What happens in a situation like that is, and there's a high population, is your younger deer are getting kicked out or they're just ranging out, right? One of the things that I've learned, it's just sort of like people, right? The older you get, the less you move. And we found for the longest time that our older deer, when we've been testing every deer now for 7 years, and it was until 5 years ago where we had a positive. Prior to that, we were testing every deer that they would let us test. They didn't want to test fawns and they didn't want to test younger deer. They only wanted older ones because the conventional thinking at that time was that the older ones are the ones who are most apt to have it. Well, that's true in an area where there's a higher concentration of the disease or what's been established. But where in the emerging areas, like it is here, it's younger deer who are bringing it in. Now, unfortunately, last year we killed 10 antlered bucks. 6 of them were positive.
Really?
Yeah. So 60% of the antlered bucks on our place were positive. Of the 40 deer we killed, only 7 were positive. We had a 3.5-year-old doe who was. But one of those
does the philosophy shift then to kill younger bucks at that point? Is that
well,
what
yeah.
you're saying?
There's a article I wrote on the MeatEater website about this that I changed my mind about. We were always killing a lot of deer to kind of keep that population down, but like there was this whole thing you had to wear a hat if you killed a too small of a buck or a nubbin buck and stuff. We had a
sombrero of shame.
Yeah, and it was funny and it was cool and everything, but it was the right mentality, right? Of okay, you're going to kill more deer, and let's let the younger ones go. And then I, like 6 or 7 years ago, I'm like understanding more and more about chronic wasting disease. And if there's one thing that I will promise you in any discussion, I will reserve the right to change my mind.
Sure.
If you can show, you'd be surprised how people don't change their mind about stuff. And that's kind of what does make me change my mind, seeing people who don't, and the kind of the people that they are, I guess.
Yep.
And my dad, I was able to change my dad's mind, man. If you could change that fella's mind, here's what I thought. He was this really rigid guy, but he talked to me, and then eventually he'd like come around to something. What usually happened is that he made it his idea. Whatever it was that he introduced 2 or 3 years later, it was his idea.
That's a great way to do it.
Well, yeah.
Plant the seed, right?
The older you get, the more you realize you don't know.
Well, that's right. That's for sure. And then that's where it goes to, philosophy. So population reduction, we just stopped the whole the buck management thing. And, even though we weren't like super strict about it anyway, and the only thing was, I think you probably saw, if you saw our episodes, we killed young bucks, but so did my nephew, not just did our guests, but so did my nephews, and people had shot. It was more for the older hunters, it's like, hey, give them a chance. But then I actually had the experience where I really got upset with and this is the Brittany and Helen episode. So that was 7 or 8 years ago. And I think we talked about it on the podcast, but it wasn't on the show because I told the cameraman to shut the camera off. One of our family friends, and who had been hunting with us for a long time, he shot a 1 antlered buck, 1.5-year-old buck at 50 yards. And he knew it was, what it was. And I was just like, come on, man. And he's always been trigger happy, but it was one of those things where I was kind of, and he hadn't seen anything, and he was cold, and it was, it was one of those things. Well, sometimes you don't get one.
Right.
Right. That's part of hunting too. He just wasn't used to that. He had been so spoiled for so long of getting a deer and getting a decent buck every year that he's like, I can't believe I've been sitting here for two days and I haven't killed one yet. So bam, he shot this one. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, right? Anyway, but I didn't feel good about doing that. I kind of read him the riot act, and I was just like, come on, man, this is just, and we talked about it a little bit on the podcast, which he wasn't on, and I didn't use his name or anything, and then he was upset about that. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm done managing people.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
No, just the idea, like I've been in that same situation. I have, family and friends. I've had, name won't be mentioned, but there was a guy who's in my wedding party, and he knows who he is. He knows who he is. And, and I still wish the best for him. It's just this situation changed the dynamic of our relationship. And he came out and he'd asked if he could come out to the ranch with his wife. I was like, sure. And long story short, found out that he killed some deer that he wasn't supposed to, one, and he brought out someone else that he wasn't supposed to, that was never cleared. And I was like, there's some things that I can forgive, and there's some things that I can forget in life. But when someone shows their true colors about who they are and how they see things, and, it's not like this management. I've been involved in wild game management for 15 to 20 years, on both of our family ranches, and one I own at myself. My wife and we own it wholeheartedly. And that was at the ranch this guy was at. And He knew what he was doing. He's been hunting with me for 20 years. It made no sense. It was like just a complete lapse of judgment, or rather it was maybe I didn't see all the things he had done before and hidden before. And now everything's coming to light and I'm seeing who he really is. And, the truth is somewhere in between those two, I feel like, but it's not for me to manage or worry about. All I know is that like, I don't need to deal with that. And as I get older, there's a less bullshit that I need to worry about and less bullshit I need to deal with people. Yep. And the thing is, it's like, there's always somebody else who wants to come. I can't tell you how many people are like, can I come and hunt your ranch? And I'm like, I don't even get there as much as I want to.
Right.
We have family that lives on the land and takes care of it and every stuff on a day-to-day. But as far as the real wildlife management and like really kind of getting things going, I'm the head of that. I'm managing that. And really Matt's my right-hand man with that these days. And we're spending most of the time out there doing that. Now, I'd love to bring people in. I've mentored tons of hunters and I brought them in, but I instead of like letting my uncle used to tell me, how we'd manage things. And a quick funny story is like, I remember one day I was out in the blind and I see this 14-point buck. It's 6.5 years old. It's the biggest deer I've ever seen in my entire life. And I had been told at the breakfast table the day before that we've killed all the bucks that we're going to kill for this year. We need X many doe left. And, this is what's left on the list. And I'm sitting there next to this other guy and we're both going, oh, man, all right, well, that's what it is, and we've been trying to do this management plan for years. Go out there and I see this deer and it's like, in my view, at 100 yards, 125 yards for like 45 minutes, back and forth to these fields. And I'm like, oh my God, like it would be my first shot with my very first rifle that I bought on my own with my own money. I was like, this is it. This is the story. But I was like, I'm adhering to their management, right? Get back there and I tell them about that. And they're like, dang it, why didn't you shoot that deer? We've been waiting for someone to shoot that deer the whole year. I'm like, do you remember yesterday when you told me this story about how, that was for the other guy sitting next to you. And I was like, what? And I vowed that day that I would never, ever let somebody else determine my idea of the age class of what it is that can be shot. If I'm on someone else's ranch, obviously I'm going to go ahead and adhere to that because I'm going to follow the rules. You're a guest and it's like
the captain is always right.
That's right. Right. And and they go down whatever ship they put on, but I'm going to go ahead and follow those rules and that advice. But I realized I was like, okay, they had been saying that we need to have, a certain age class that we're shooting at. That ranch is 5.5 years or older. We've seen some up to 10.5 years old there. And
no kidding.
But it's very rare. Like that one Colin shot 2 years ago at our ranch with us. Colin's the other half of him at my ranch. And he took one and there was like no teeth left. And like the guy's like, I haven't seen one of these forever. He's like, it tasted like leather. It was bad. But back to my story, like I learned then about what the fact is. I need to learn about deer, about how to really age them as best you can out in the field. Cause sometimes you can kind of, one thing, hey, this one looks 3.5. Well, it could be 7.5. You got to look for the suede belly at the back. There's different things you have to look because you really need to study. And I hit the books, man. I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could. And as a result, I became a better, idea of manager of deer. And I'm able to help pass that on to folks who come out to my place too. And, like for instance, Matt, 2 years ago, the largest antlered deer that we had seen in years at that ranch, this is in Southwest Texas, pops out and maybe like 120 yards. And he sends me the pictures of it he's taken with the camera. We always take cameras with us, so we can really evaluate way far out. We got some nice zoom cameras. And he sent it to me and he's like, oh, it ran off. And I remember he was like, not, oh, did I do the right thing? And I'm like, yeah, that was a 4.5-year-old deer. And 90% of the people held back, man.
Yeah, I wanted to, but you could just tell. I mean, you could tell when the body just doesn't, the neck isn't coming into the stomach, and the legs don't look like spindles. I mean, this deer was beautiful set of antlers, but just a medium size. Like you can tell he was 3.5, 4.5, not a mature animal,
Yeah. That deer would die every time here. Even when we were doing buck management. And the reason for that is smaller pieces of land, lots more deer. We were literally letting 1.5 and 2.5-year-olds go. I've killed 2.5-year-old bucks that were 145 inches, the standard that I killed was 192. I mean, the thing was a giant deer, but he's only a 5-year-old buck. I mean, it wasn't like deer just don't get that old around here. That's the other part of it. Right.
Right.
So you go back to the thing about, so the point is it's sort of incremental. I mean, if you come to the farm sometime, you'll see that what we have in terms of like, here's what we used to do, and then here's what we did, and now we're still doing this. But because we're not doing any of them, it was very loose. It was very loose management. Like I said, it's like, and so I was trying to strike a balance in there. And then between not wanting to manage people and then wanting to be true to my conservation ideals, that killing younger bucks, it's just got to be done. I mean, you imagine you go from it's a sin to kill a nubbin buck, and now it's like just shoot it.
Yeah, but that's a CWD thing, though.
Yes, I will say this: if I was in an area where CWD wasn't any kind of a concern, I would be still doing that very loose buck management that we did. Like I would let people shoot whatever the hell they wanted to a point, like a kid, a guest, whatever. Because here's the other thing that we do know in an area where you've got, I don't know what your deer populations are like there, but here, one of the things that I know is that you can't stockpile bucks either.
Right.
And you've got to have bucks that are in every age class. And it's not like, and this is always one of those exercises I love to go through when with a land, like a hunter goes, well, I hunt 80 acres and I only saw 15 deer opening weekend. And I'm like, and you don't think that's enough? Or the guy who's got 120 acres and he thinks, I think I should be able to kill 2 mature bucks off of this property every year. So you got 120 acres and you think you should kill 2. And what's a mature deer? Well, 4.5 or a 5.5. All right, let's back that up. And then you start working through the numbers with them. You got to have bucks in every, and not just 1 or 2. If you're going to kill 2, you're going to have 4 or 5 in that age class, right? Because you're not going to see them.
No way.
And then you start to back those numbers out. You got to have 150 deer and per square mile, and 80 of them got to be bucks in order for that kind of stuff to happen. And when you start doing that kind of math with people, sometimes the lights go on and other times they go, and then they just walk away from you. They don't want to talk about it anymore. And I'm interested in the person who's there, the lights goes on, because I'm not sure that we're ever going to get that other person to come around to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to come around to it. Or I've only got so much energy that I can put into that,
Sure.
But so the CWD thing was but it was twofold really. It was this, I don't want to manage people anymore. So here's the other part of it. In Wisconsin, with a gun, you get 1 buck tag, or with a bow, you get 1 buck tag. So ironically enough, if that deer tests positive, you get another one. So the buck I killed last year tested positive for CWD. I'm starting the gun season with 2 buck tags. What I would like, so that's going to allow me. So what I've always said to my hunters is this: we need to fill doe tags. And I'd like you to fill your buck tag too. Where it used to be, I want you to be selective about bucks, but shoot all the does you want. And so I'm not saying you can't be selective about your bucks. I'm saying you don't have to be. And it's made it a lot easier. And then kind of comes down to, you do manage people a little bit, but it kind of comes down to the kind of people that you have hunting with you too, right? Like, right. I could have shot a bushel. I could have shot a half a dozen 1.5-year-old bucks opening weekend last year. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't, and I told everybody, well, I didn't shoot one. Just didn't. Well, you got to fill your buck tag. And he's like, do you remember the last year I didn't fill my buck tag? And, anybody who's been around very long, we're like, no. And so Wednesday, I shot a 2.5-year-old buck. He's a nice, big, full-bodied, 175 pound. He was a big, heavy deer. shot him, and I was like, well, it's time for me to shoot a buck now. And there he is. And 7-8 years ago, rock on, buddy. You're fun to watch,
Yeah.
10 years ago, I wouldn't even turn my head. I was like, oh, because as soon as you see him, right? Like when I shot that big one, the standard, it wasn't any, I wonder if he's big. And I was boom.
Yeah.
It was just,
there's no time to contemplate
about it.
Binoculars down. Yeah.
I had one like that last year. It was, oh my God. Like he can barely stand on his legs. Like, how do you?
Yeah, you see all
how
that,
are you
right?
moving?
I mean, it looks like me, big old man with sunken shoulders.
He's a handsome. That's a handsome.
Well, yeah, and very handsome, right?
Of course.
But it's just so that's really interesting. But I also don't want. I mean, one of the things that I didn't want people. I remember Steve saying this. Well, I'm not going to shoot that one. And I was like, well, I appreciated that Ranella didn't shoot a buck because I mean, what the hell, he's killing deer. It's not like, oh, this is the only chance he's ever going to get, right? He's killed a couple of does on the farm. But all of that enters into it. So when you're in a situation like that again, it's not, and I can't speak to your area, but I can tell you about like Northern Illinois, where they've been able to control CWD. It's the habitat isn't contiguous, right? There's the only time it is contiguous when all the damn corn is up, and that's all that northern part of they have down. I mean, a little corner of the driftless down there too. But so they've got these woodlots that are sort of islands. And sure, deer move through the corn and they live in the corn and they do all that. But in the wintertime, when they're going and doing their culling, they're going into these 30 and 40 acre plots. And, they're like figuring out, I mean, it's very focused and it's very clear and it's very, and they've been able to control. They know how many deer they've got. People around here there are hunters around here who go, oh, we don't have that many deer. You're not paying attention. You're just not, if that's the case. Well, then if we've got this disease, how come we've got so many? Where are all the dead deer? It's the insidiousness of the disease again, right?
Doesn't work like that. No.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that at all. So the other things, to get back to your question, getting your deer tested and working with your biologist is super important, right? Not transporting when you do that. And I happen to be one of the people that reinvigorated a disposal program in this state. When the CWD was first discovered, they had disposal options down there where they knew where it was, and then they were doing sampling everywhere else and finding it, but then as they continued that sampling, it just kept it was spreading, but the prevalence was low. And so how do you so one of the ways you do it is you don't leave. It's like picking up, I was talking to a politician about it, one of our elected officials, and I said, it's like picking up your tissues. You don't blow your nose and throw it on the ground. You throw it away so that you're not leaving infectious material on the ground. It's the same kind of thing. If we can dispose of those carcasses, the problem that we have, of course, is we killed a lot of deer. We killed 6,000 deer in this county last year. And it's not that big of a county. And we have a population of, I don't know, 40,000 deer. 35 to 40,000 deer. And if you kill 6,000, you're not doing anything about the population, right? It's not, you're not taking the surplus. But anyway, that's still a lot of carcasses to dispose of. One of these 20-yard dumpsters that we put liners in, and it costs, right now it's costing about $5 to $6 a carcass to dispose of it properly. And it's also accumulating, it's a lot of stuff, it's something gruesome about a carcass full of deer, a dumpster full of deer carcasses, I'll tell you.
Butterflies.
Yep.
Oh, it's just like, and you go on and I crush them with the skid steer. It's like this big block of bones and shit that comes out. But that disposal, so you're keeping that infectious material off of the land. And some agencies where where like out west, there's some places where they have chronic wasting disease. Well, you can't, you're up on a mountainside, you can't bring the whole thing out. You're bringing out and you're leaving spinal column and, and stuff that's going to be the most apt to be infected, but it's on the landscape where it already exists. So that's like the second best thing. Like, don't move that carcass off of the landscape. Disposal is a big deal, but it's also problematic because we're throwing 200 carcasses into a dumpster, which is about what we get into them. It costs about $1,000, no more than that now per dumpster. If you've got prevalence of 10 or 15%, well, shit, only 20 of them got the disease, So you're throwing a bunch of carcasses because you don't know. It takes a while to get the test results back. So we actually hang ours, try to hang them until we find out whether they're positive or not.
What's the turnaround time?
Well, here in Wisconsin, it's 7 to 10 days. And then last year, because of, like everything gets blamed on COVID. And because of COVID and some of the backups in the labs and stuff, it was taking 14 days, 3 weeks, which, now all of a sudden you can't hang them long enough.
Right.
But then other guys are adapting strategies. And I've done this too, where you quarter them and you can hang them in a smaller cooler or a repurposed refrigerator or, whatever. So you're not spending all that time and energy on it until you find out. And I have chosen not to eat CWD positive meat, as have a lot of other people. And, consequently, I want to know that it's known, how the testing works. There's you get two results, positive or not detected. And not detected means we're not guaranteeing it doesn't have CWD. We're just saying that we couldn't detect it yet. Yeah, I saw you go question that one. Point is a deer how long does it take from the time the deer takes up the disease through the various means? And it's detectable in the lymph nodes where we can detect it. And and it can be in the meat. And the question is weeks, or the answer to that question is weeks, months. They're quite sure. That's one of those things that I really want to see what the numbers are on that. But as you can imagine, right, because of how it grows up, I'm sorry, this is stuff I didn't explain before, but how it builds up exponentially in the system, it's got to get to a point where it's detectable in the lymph nodes when you take them out.
At the same time.
Yeah, it takes a certain amount of time, but at the same time, as it's working through the system, like we have these proteins in our system, it's in the meat, but it's got to, it's like anything. There's got to be enough of it in the filter, which is part of what the lymph nodes are, right? In order to be there, to be detectable. So not detected doesn't mean that necessarily doesn't have it. So when you start talking about an area that we have a prevalence of over 50% in bucks, what's the actual prevalence of number of deer that are positive? That's what concerns me. My biggest concern. So personally, I don't eat known CWD positive meat. I've seen what an animal looks like when I wouldn't eat that animal. Why would I eat one that's got the disease, the same disease that's going to do that to it? That's my thought process on that. But I fully respect other people who are like, I'm going to eat it anyway. I happen to notice that a lot of people who say they're going to eat it anyway don't bother to get it tested. Oddly, some of those same people are getting their bucks tested because if it comes back positive, they get another buck tag. So it's just a lot of these weird little things. So how do you incentivize people to maybe harvest more deer? Well, I think that the earn a buck thing was great, or a bonus buck thing was a great idea. There's resistance to that for reasons that I don't fully understand, but or that defy logic. I understand them, but they defy logic. I don't want anybody telling me what I got to do. Well, you can get your buck tag, but I'm saying, how about for people who want to shoot more than that? Or who want, like a land manager like me, well, you just need to let more people onto your property. And I'm like, well, that means I got to manage more people, because I think you, George, you and I I just don't open it wide open to anybody. I've had that experience, not interested.
Yeah.
That's why
doesn't always work out also pretty.
No. And that's why programs like voluntary public access, where the government leases the land from you. Okay, fine. There's people that works for it. Not going to work for me. Had that experience. Not interested in it. Taking private land and turning it into de facto public land. Going back to then, well, what does the land get out of that too? The landowner gets paid. The access seeker gets access. What's the access seeker done for that?
Right.
There's a lot. I mean, there's a whole discussion around conservation funding and access funding and all that too. That I think is it's an honest discussion that has to be had about, when you're talking about conservation is hunting. Well, not necessarily. Can be hunting. And then who pays for conservation? Well, sure, Pittman Robertson's $1 billion a year. You know what conservation and then that comes from, a lot of that money comes from the shooting sports, right? It's not, I mean, I don't buy that many bullets and guns and stuff like that. It's not like, I mean, and average hunters just don't. It's more from the shooting sports. But so maybe half of that money goes, so half a billion dollars a year. The Farm Bill has $6 billion a year in it for conservation. And everybody pays for that.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from the general funds, right?
Yeah, right.
Some of the money that is spent from that voluntary public access money is a part of that, or it's actually in addition to that. Everybody pays for that. So everybody in America is subsidizing voluntary public access, so hunters can go on to it. What? I mean, to me, that kind of strikes me as a little bit odd. So then, but somehow leasing is a bad thing. The government's leasing land, first of all. And then second of all, well, wait a minute. You're talking about free access. What's the land get out of it? Well, there's the VPA habitat improvement stuff. And I think that's great, but that's just a carrot to landowners to maybe it would get them more involved with conservation, but there's plenty of programs that are already available it's just another incentive thing. I don't know. I think that hunters and access seekers owe the land that they're extracting from. What's the land get out of it?
Yeah, I always feel like, we've talked about this before. I spent a lot of time with Native American elders and indigenous elders worldwide when I was working with Harvey Arden from National Geographic. And one of the, big things that you hear every single one of them talking about was this ideology of leaving the land and just the environment, physically, spiritually, mentally, better for the seventh generation down the road. And, you and I both being fifth generation landowners and stuff too, I want to imagine that I'm doing things now on my land that that fifth generation down, they can be like, yeah, great granddad, like they can track all the things, like what you've done with like your timber improvements and trying to keep the deer off of, these tiny baby, oaks so that you can let them grow up so that, someone can make that decision, however many years down the road on having a timber stand, which also helps to, pay for, there's taxes, there's insurance, there's things that go into being a landowner that you're going to have, there's equipment that you're going to have out there. And, you and I both know there's always things that are breaking. So having funds and being able to like set aside things from these projects and, like you said, to the equip NRCS. I mean, Matt and I literally last week were driving around with our NRCS agent and looking at all these different types of programs that we can be involved in. We've done some equip stuff, but now I'm looking at like, there's 700 different options and all these things around that I didn't understand the breadth of potential there. I kind of had a little idea about how some of the other projects we'd want to do, but now my mind is blown and it's just like overwhelming thinking about all the things that I can do to help with some incentivization. And it's not like they're paying you and you don't have to, you don't have to put anything in. A lot of these, maybe like half fee that you're paying in and maybe they're paying for a percentage of the other. You about to say something, Doug?
Oh yeah, because the landowner still has to make the investment in time and then the rest of the money and all of that. And here's the other part of it. And this is one of the things that I always tell the politicians when we talk about this stuff. That is, you're getting multiple benefits from $1 spent. So there's the habitat improvement. Well, what's that habitat for? Well, it's not just for deer or for chukars or pheasants or whatever. It's for all wildlife. There's air quality, there's water quality, there's erosion prevention. There's the aesthetic end of it. Tourism, ecotourism, and I guess is what we'd call it now around here, is a big part of it. Like people come up here just to see to see the countryside. And that's one of the economic drivers. Agriculture isn't, sure, it's still the biggest economic driver in the state. it's not the biggest economic driver. It's the biggest moneymaker in the state. But where it used to be 10 small farms supporting 10 families, it's one giant farm supporting one family. I mean, and that's just kind of the nature of, or like where it's just sort of the nature of how agriculture has changed. Let me to finish that. But, or that those little farms are being bought by folks from away or who are moving here, and they're making, broadband internet's a big deal up here now. That we have people have access to the internet because you can work from Yuba. And like I was talking about earlier,
that sounds
and
exotic.
you can work. Yeah, it does sound exotic. You can work from home in that manner. So what a great economic driver that is. But so that person that landowner might own 80 or 100 acres, and they'll lease that 40 of ag or 60 to ag to a local farmer who's still getting the opportunity to do that. I could go on and on about like corn and beans versus sustainable small dairy farms with hogs and, and chickens and all that kind of stuff too. But, otherwise, but because corn and beans, we can't compete with like Iowa and, it's these little plots of 30 or 40 acres and as opposed to whole sections that are being planted out there, you just can't. I mean, the efficiency isn't there and the ground isn't as good and all of that, but that opportunity is still there. So that land would still be farmed. But now there's this other economic driver too, this work from home person, or maybe they're a small sustainable farmer. All of those things are changing, things a little bit. And if we can incentivize that landowner to take better care of the woods and take better care of the ecosystem, then everybody's winning, from that. So multiple benefits from $1 spent. I think is a really important conservation message. What is the benefit of what are the multiple benefits of, and I'm just ragging on voluntary public access, but I'm not necessarily against it, but what's the multiple benefits from that? There aren't. They're going in there taking something and they're not really paying for it. Everybody's paying for it. Well, but then they're buying a license and they're stopping at the local store and they're doing all okay.
Yeah, there's some commerce there, but
yeah, well, I mean, it's just like,
okay, the land,
right? What's the land getting out of it?
Yep.
That's my question. And I will also say that these small voluntary public access plots around here are not good neighbors. I've been asked to get in the middle of settling some disputes, and I'm just like, and I've gotten in the middle of them because people reach out to me and go, "Hey, I know you live in this area. And this guy won't let me go in to get this deer." And I'm like, "Well, what happened?" Well, I was hunting on this piece of voluntary public access land, and it was open MFL, but so it's open land. And so 15 acres. And the guy's, hunting on the edge of it with a bow, and he shoots the landowner owned a bunch of land, but it was the rest of it was in ag, like 120 acres. And then so 15 of it was in woods, and this guy's hunting this 15 acres of open because the landowner's getting a tax break, and they're somebody from away, they're from Illinois, who own that land. And they don't have a place there or anything. This guy shoots this deer, runs into this. I know the people whose land it ran into. And, they got a big piece of property. They farm, but they're avid hunters. And they're like every weekend, sometimes 3 times a week, we got a new neighbor over on those 15 acres. So, and the landowner who's getting the benefit of that 15 acres of a tax break or a lease or, or the VPA lease or whatever, they aren't there to deal with the problems. So it's like, geez, we got to do better than that. So that's what I think sharing the land can do. And I think VPA is a good program other than some of the things I think that I just talked about. I think that block management out West is another good one. And MeatEater's just been rewarding some people who put land in. I think those things the walk-in programs are good. Public land is good, but to somehow not private landowners shouldn't be getting some kind of, and the land shouldn't be getting benefit from the people who are accessing it. like somehow I should be able to knock on. I remember when you've heard this, right? I remember when you could knock on the door and they'd sure just say, "Go ahead," and it's like,
well, backstrap, right?
Yeah. Those days are gone, folks. I mean, they just are.
Yep.
I mean, there's still some of that opportunity. So, I mean, just if I'm giving my advice to anybody who's interested in access, one of them is understand that it has value, and that you should be willing to give something for that value. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's, I know there's people who will just like, yeah, I'm cool with people hunting on my place. I just want to control it. I want to know who they're there. My dad used to let people mushroom hunt on the farm, and he goes, but I get a percentage. That was his thing. That,
yeah.
Especially when he got to the point where, he couldn't get out there and do it himself anymore, and do some of that kind of stuff. And he'd ask him, what are you going to do with the mushrooms? Oh, I eat them. Well, foragers would go out and they just pick mushrooms to sell them. And it's like, well, that's different then too. So you want to think you should get free access to go in and take something. Well, nobody else is taking them. Well, maybe they would. So, I mean, it's like, there's all of those things, that's all part of this big old ball of nonsense that's going on in my head that ends up coming out in these, these various ways.
Well, I love what you've said there. And I think it's, I'm seeing more, I guess, angles of like sharing the land too, when you're talking about this. Obviously when you first, we discussed the Map My Ranch of making maps for the landowners, and, hopefully they make some extra for the land users. Cause it's, like you said, it's a wonderful tool. Speaking of which, you'll have a knock on your door from UPS today with a brand new map of the Duren farm from
nice.
My ranch. So, let us know what you think. We'll do a customized one later. This is just one with the border on there, but, like when my personal thought when you were talking about this was like, I was just so excited to be involved in whatever way. And my first thought was like, what can I do besides like the mapping side of things to help out, to get the word out about this? Because I love this type of thing. And, I think, it's like growing up too, like in a ranching farming community, you're always like helping your neighbor. You're always doing something else. Someone broke down. Why are you going to get him? What? That question's odd. Of course I'm going to go help them out. Like, that's just what you do. That's how you work together. Cause my combine might break down next week. Something else might happen. I might need to have someone help me out with bringing over a lift or something to work on the tractor, whatever it is. Like, you're working together in that kind of community. And I've seen that firsthand. I know that you've seen it. And it's just, growing up in a city, it's like I kind of had two lives, man. I had the time where I'd be spending at the ranch and that farming community and my granddad and, his cattle. And then I'd also, have the concrete jungle life and stuff. And it was such a split type of personality. But I got to learn a lot of different, perspectives, and that's
that's it, right? The perspective that kind of thing gives you. And that's the other part of it, right? I think what I've learned is that people who've had wider experiences have wider perspectives. Boy, that's not manned space flight, is it? But
is that going to fit on the bumper sticker?
one more bumper sticker.
Yeah. Well, but that's so important,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What I wanted to say about sharing the land is that we're still trying to figure out what it's going to be. I use this expression all the time, right? And that is, we're building this bicycle as we're riding it. And it seems like we've got two machines that we're building. One is that it becomes a much bigger business juggernaut where, like our sponsors like Vortex and Savage and Onyx and you guys, and then we can get more of those. And I've not really even tried most of the, like Savage was one who reached out to me through some other people that were doing stuff with them that I knew. Onyx and Vortex were two that I went after, but, and that it would, we could turn it into a bigger business and, and really make it be a member thing and people, all this. I mean, there's just some huge ideas out there about it, but ultimately what I want it to be is a place where people can meet, we're talking about, well, how do we build like a blog or something like that? So people with common interests meet, and that they can get together, and that it's a place for resources, and also building more of the examples that people can follow. That's really what we want it to be, sort of like bringing Riley forward. And, and here's the structure of it. So if nothing else, that will always be maintained in this crazy internet universe that we have, that people could, I was wondering about, sharing my place, and you Google that and sharing land comes up, or conservation access, land access, and sharing the land comes up, and they go there and they see, oh, well, there's this. Here's an example. I can do that here. One of the coolest things about sharing land so far is that, well, you said it yourself. Well, we've kind of been doing this, right? Well, let's tell those stories too, right?
Yep.
And really what we're doing with sharing land is helping people to formalize, or, it's sort of like you and I grew up. It's sort of second nature. So much of what we've talked about. Imagine being a new landowner. Well, how do I know how to let people, these guys are knocking on my door, and it can be a disaster. I know plenty of landowners who have said it was a disaster to let people on there, because they didn't respect it. They didn't do whatever. They just they used the tricks, and they got on the land, and then they shut it down, and now they're just closed up, and we're not going to let it happen anymore. That's not good either. Here's how you can do this in a way that's good for you. It's good for the access seeker. It's good for the land, and it's good for the future, right? For the present and the future. So, that's really what I want. My own legacy, man. I've tried not to think about it. It was a really interesting question when you sent that to me. I was like, I think my legacy, it's not ours, it's just our turn, is what it's all based on, right? I mean, there hasn't been anything in my life that has been as impactful to other people. I mean, I've heard from people from all over the country and all over the world, quite honestly, that this really speaks to me. And people writing their master's thesis, and, can I use this? And sure, as long as you attribute it to me. People from South Africa, people from Australia, people from Germany, people from Southeast Asia, who, but that's their place, right? It's their sense of place. And it's, I sometimes think some friends are traveling right now. My daughter just traveled last week, and I was like, I've never been there. That would be, but I'm a real strong believer in place. And I think that philosophically, if we can think about where it is that we are, and what we're doing in our time, what has been done in the past, and we can learn from that, and then we're doing the best that we can in planning, and then it's going to be in the future. I think that's really what my, legacy is. The other part of it is that property. The next generation already knows what's going to happen next. That realization, and if you haven't had it, George, you will, that you're standing there and going, if I topple over right now, this is all still here tomorrow, even if I'm not. And I thought about that so much with my dad, and the stuff that, God, we just worked out there. And then he got to a point where he couldn't do anything, but it was fun just to like bomb around, to get him in the buggy, in the side by side, and bomb around, or get him in the truck. And, and he would talk about things, and, and all of that. And God, what's really kind of crazy is that 63 is I'm starting to become that guy. I was just having one of my cooperators here, and I was like, I can't do that anymore. Something I had him doing. I was like, I used to do that. And I think part of that is that I hope that we're also helping, that it also will help people to have that perspective of time, maybe sooner than what I got it. A lot of stuff that I've learned in my life, it took me a long time to learn them. If I'd have known then what I know now, but so kind of maybe speeding up that learning curve a little bit. I know that's happened with my daughter. God, she's hysterical. She's going to be 26, and she'll say stuff to you. If you keep a good roof on a building, it'll last a long time. She can tell you what, it's hilarious, because it's something that I said. And she can tell you what trees are at 60 miles an hour. What kind of tree is that, you know? And she'll go, oh, from its shape, it looks like an American elm or a basswood or, you know, whatever. And so I think that some of the legacy stuff is the philosophy, you know, having fun and, you know, being interested and being interesting and hopefully nurturing that or encouraging it in other people.
Well, I know that you have an influence on a lot of different people. I know myself, I can speak for myself, and I can speak for many others in that, we appreciate, you know, all the things that you're open to sharing and your experiences, what you've learned. It is a living legacy as it is now, and what you're doing with sharing the land. I am honored, Doug, to be a part of this, and I can't wait to see this continue to flourish and grow. I think it's just such an amazing initiative and program for all the reasons we talked about today and more. And I thank you so much for coming out today and talking with us about this. I hope we can have you again on another time, and looking forward to having one of these in person.
I hope we can all get together sometime, you know.
That's going to happen. We'll make sure. And I remember when I invited you out to my place, you're like, you better be careful if you invite me. I was like, I want you to come out and check it out. And I'd love to see your place too. And I'm so grateful and glad that we got to connect. And for those who may not know yet, can you tell people where they can find out more about Sharing the Land and about yourself and your other projects as well, please?
Oh yeah. All that stuff, right? So I have a really tricky name to my website. It's www.dougduren.com. And so my name is not spelled, my last name is not spelled like an 80s hair band. It's Duren, it's very German. Duren is the last name. So dougduren.com. If you go to the website, there's all kinds of stuff on there. If you want to buy, if you're interested in any of our merch, that stuff's on there. And anything that we make on that is what's going in to help fund our conservation projects and our conservation initiatives. Sharingtheland.com is where Sharing the Land is. It is a quote unquote for-profit. We're not making any money, but it's a quote unquote for-profit organization. We may end up becoming a .org at some point. We're trying to figure that out, but you can go on there and have a look around. And I'd really encourage landowners to do it. Like I said, it's a handful, but I guess we're in about 6 states right now where we've got interested landowners at the very least. It's a process with the landowners, right? For them to go through it and like, hey, I've got questions about liability. I got questions about insurance. And we're working through all of that stuff as we go. And so this first year we knew was going to be slow and it was going to grow organically and weren't like pushing. But it's like every week we get another landowner who's interested. And then so we start them into that process. Hopefully at some point it'll, like I said, with some of this web development stuff and all of that, that'll become easier for everybody involved. Right now it's fairly cumbersome, but we're having fun doing it. And I got to tell you, you know, getting sponsors like you guys, but we're going to be shooting some, has been great. You and Nichols Lures and Trout Routes. And then our major sponsors like Onyx and Vortex and Savage really came up. And Savage, we're going to be shooting 3. We're doing our first one coming up here in October. I don't know how long it's going to take for it to be turned over, but it's going to be a 10 to 15 minute video specifically about Leopold and the Riley Game Cooperative.
Awesome.
And obviously when that's done, we're going to be featuring the heck out of that thing. And, you know, so people can learn about that and, you know, like what they did and how they did it. And you can read about that. You can go to the Aldo Leopold Foundation, but on our Sharing the Land website, we've got the stuff about the Riley Game Cooperative on there. The most winnowed it down to the important stuff. You can follow me on Instagram. It's at Doug Duren on Instagram. I don't really do Facebook too much. Stuff kind of flops over there. But I do most of my posting on Instagram. In fact, I think I do all my posting there, and the rest of it just sort of flops over onto Facebook. I do have a personal Facebook page though, but I try to limit that to just folks, and I try not to rant and rave too much about anything. So, yeah, check me out in those places. And man, if you're a landowner, you have any questions about this at all, feel free. We don't have all the answers, but we're really working at like, how can we make this better? And if you have ideas, I'm interested in those too.
That's great.
So thanks for having me, guys. This has been great.
Oh, thank you so much. Looking forward to the next time, and we'll be in touch. Everybody take care, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.